Picture the gentle flow of two ancient rivers, their waters carrying the dreams and ambitions of humanity's earliest children. The Euphrates and Tigris rivers wind through what we now call Iraq, their banks holding secrets that stretch back over 5,000 years. Here, in this cradle between the waters, something extraordinary happened that would change the course of human history forever. Long before the mighty pyramids of Egypt pierced the desert sky, long before Rome's legions marched across continents, even before the great pharaohs ruled along the Nile, there existed a civilization so advanced, so innovative that it earned the right to be called humanity's very first. This was Sumer, a name that whispers across millennia with the weight of countless firsts. Through the patient work of archaeologists, their brushes gently sweeping away layers of time, we have uncovered the remarkable story of the Sumerians. These ancient people, working with nothing but their ingenuity and the fertile soil beneath their feet, created the blueprint for civilization itself. They gave us cities where thousands could live together in harmony. They invented writing, allowing human thoughts to survive beyond a single lifetime. They established laws that brought order to chaos, and they built temples that reached toward the heavens with hope and reverence. The ruins of their great cities still stand today. Uruk, Lagash, and Nippur rest quietly in the Iraqi desert, their weathered walls holding memories of bustling marketplaces, solemn religious ceremonies, and the everyday lives of people who were, in many ways, remarkably like us. When you walk among these ancient stones, you can almost hear the echoes of children playing, craftsmen working, and scribes carefully pressing their reed styluses into soft clay tablets. What makes Sumer truly special is not just that it was first, but how completely it established the foundations upon which all future civilizations would build. Every time you read a book, follow a law, live in a city, or marvel at a great building, you are experiencing gifts that the Sumerians gave to humanity over 5,000 years ago. Their legacy flows through history like their beloved rivers, nourishing every civilization that followed. Tonight, as you settle into comfort and let your mind wander through time, we will journey together to this remarkable place where it all began. We will walk the streets of the world's first cities, witness the moment when humans first learned to capture their thoughts in writing, and discover how a people living so long ago created the very idea of civilization itself. This is the true story of Sumer, told through the careful discoveries of modern archaeology, a story of humanity's most important beginning. To understand why Sumer holds the title of humanity's first civilization, we must first understand what scholars mean when they use that powerful word. Civilization is not simply a group of people living together, nor is it merely the ability to build impressive structures or create beautiful art. True civilization, as defined by archaeologists and historians, requires a very specific combination of achievements that transform human society from scattered tribes into something entirely new and extraordinary. Picture yourself as an archaeologist, carefully excavating layer after layer of ancient earth in southern Iraq. With each gentle brush stroke, you are moving backward through time, past the Islamic conquests, past the rise and fall of Babylon, past the great Assyrian Empire, deeper and deeper until you reach deposits that are over 5,000 years old. Here, in these deepest layers, you find something remarkable. You discover not just artifacts, but evidence of a complete transformation in how humans organized their lives. The Sumerians, who flourished between approximately 3,500 and 2,000 years before the Common Era, were the first people in human history to develop all 5 essential elements that scholars use to identify true civilization. These 5 pillars, like the columns of a great temple, supported everything that came after and continue to support human society today. The first pillar is the development of true cities. Before Sumer, humans lived in small villages, temporary camps, or nomadic groups that rarely exceeded a few hundred individuals. The Sumerians created something entirely different. They built permanent settlements that housed thousands, then tens of thousands of people. These were not simply larger villages, but entirely new forms of human community with specialized districts, complex infrastructure, and sophisticated systems for managing the needs of vast populations. Imagine walking through the streets of ancient Uruk in its prime, around 3,200 years before our time. The city stretches as far as your eyes can see, home to perhaps 50,000 souls. You pass neighborhoods of craftsmen where the sound of hammers on metal rings through the air. You walk by districts of merchants where goods from distant lands are displayed in covered markets. You see residential areas where families have lived for generations, their houses built of sun-dried bricks and arranged around peaceful courtyards where children play and elders share stories. The second pillar of civilization is organized government. Hunter-gatherer societies and small villages could operate through informal leadership and family relationships, but cities require something more sophisticated. The Sumerians developed the world's first formal governmental systems, with rulers who commanded the loyalty of entire populations and administrative structures that could coordinate the activities of thousands of people. These early governments were centered around both religious and secular authority. Sumerian kings were not just military leaders or wealthy individuals who seized power through force. They were considered chosen by the gods themselves, given divine mandate to rule over their people and maintain order in accordance with cosmic law. This religious foundation gave Sumerian government a stability and legitimacy that allowed it to function effectively across generations. The third pillar is social hierarchy, the recognition that in complex societies not everyone can perform the same role. Before civilization, most humans lived in relatively egalitarian groups where differences in status were temporary and based primarily on age, skill, or personal charisma. The Sumerians created the first permanent class systems, with priests, nobles, merchants, craftsmen, farmers, and slaves each occupying distinct positions in society. This might seem harsh or unfair by modern standards, but it was actually a tremendous innovation that allowed for unprecedented specialization. When some people could dedicate their entire lives to religious study, others to craftsmanship, others to trade, and still others to administration, the entire society could achieve levels of sophistication that would be impossible if everyone had to spend most of their time simply surviving. Consider a Sumerian potter named Ur-Nanshi who lived in the city of Lagash around 4,000 years ago. Unlike his ancestors, who might have made simple clay vessels as just one of many survival skills, Ur-Nanshi could spend his entire life perfecting his craft. He could experiment with new techniques, develop innovative designs, and create pottery of such beauty and functionality that it would be treasured for generations. This specialization, multiplied across thousands of individuals and dozens of professions, created an explosion of human capability. The fourth pillar is complex religion. While all human societies have some form of spiritual beliefs, the Sumerians developed the world's first organized religious systems with formal priesthoods, elaborate temples, and sophisticated theological concepts. Their religion was not simply a set of superstitions or folk beliefs, but a comprehensive worldview that explained the nature of existence and provided meaning and structure to daily life. Sumerian temples were not just places of worship, but served as community centers, schools, banks, and administrative headquarters. The priests were among the most educated members of society, responsible not only for religious ceremonies, but also for maintaining written records, managing agricultural estates, and coordinating community projects. Religion and practical life were seamlessly integrated in a way that provided both spiritual fulfillment and social organization. The fifth and perhaps most revolutionary pillar is writing. The Sumerians created the world's first true writing system, transforming human communication in ways that continue to shape our world today. Before writing, human knowledge could only be preserved through memory and oral tradition. Important information could be lost if the people who remembered it died, and complex ideas were difficult to preserve accurately across generations. Sumerian cuneiform writing, with its distinctive wedge-shaped marks pressed into clay tablets, changed everything. For the first time in human history, thoughts, laws, stories, and knowledge could be preserved permanently. A merchant could record a business transaction that would remain valid years later. A king could issue laws that would be remembered exactly as written. A poet could compose an epic that would be read by people living centuries in the future. The earliest Sumerian cities that archaeologists have identified include Uruk, Ur, Lagash, Nippur, and Eridu. Each of these settlements shows clear evidence of all 5 pillars of civilization, making them the first true cities in human history. The great scholar Samuel Noah Kramer, whose work History Begins at Sumer documented many Sumerian achievements, demonstrated conclusively that these cities possessed all the characteristics that define civilized society. What makes the Sumerian achievement even more remarkable is that they developed these innovations independently, without being able to learn from earlier examples. Every civilization that came after Sumer could build upon existing models of cities, governments, social systems, religions, and writing. The Sumerians had to invent these concepts from scratch through pure human ingenuity and countless generations of gradual development. The evidence for Sumerian primacy is overwhelming and continues to grow as archaeologists make new discoveries. Every year, excavations in Uruk reveal new tablets, new buildings, and new artifacts that push back the dates of Sumerian achievements and demonstrate their influence on later civilizations. From the ruins of their cities to the thousands of cuneiform tablets preserved in museums around the world, the material record clearly shows that Sumer was indeed humanity's first civilization. When we examine other ancient societies that arose around the same time or shortly after, we can see how they built upon Sumerian innovations rather than developing their own independently. The ancient Egyptians, who created their own magnificent civilization along the Nile River, show clear evidence of learning from Mesopotamian examples. Their early writing system, their concepts of kingship, and their urban planning all bear the influence of Sumerian precedents. Similarly, the Indus Valley Civilization, which flourished in what is now Pakistan and northwestern India, developed sophisticated cities and writing systems that show remarkable similarities to Sumerian innovations. While the Indus Valley people created their own unique culture, the timing and nature of their achievements suggest that they were inspired by or in contact with the Sumerian world. Even the ancient Chinese, separated from Mesopotamia by thousands of miles and seemingly isolated from outside influence, show evidence of indirect Sumerian impact. Chinese writing, government structure, and urban planning emerged thousands of years after similar innovations appeared in Sumer, and some scholars believe that knowledge of these concepts may have traveled along ancient trade routes. The Sumerians themselves were remarkably sophisticated in their understanding of what they had accomplished. Their literature and religious texts reveal a people who were conscious of their role as innovators and pioneers. They took pride in their cities, their learning, and their achievements, and they understood that they were living in a way that was fundamentally different from their ancestors. One of the most moving aspects of Sumerian civilization is how recognizably human their concerns and aspirations were. The thousands of tablets that have been translated reveal people worrying about their children's education, celebrating successful harvests, mourning the deaths of loved ones, and dreaming of better futures. They faced many of the same challenges we face today, from economic uncertainty to political conflicts to natural disasters, and their solutions often show remarkable wisdom and sophistication. For example, Sumerian schools called eduba or tablet houses were the world's first formal educational institutions. Young people, primarily boys from wealthy families, would spend years learning to read and write cuneiform, studying mathematics, literature, and religious texts. The curriculum included copying classical works, solving mathematical problems, and even creating original compositions. These schools produced the scribes, administrators, and priests who kept Sumerian civilization functioning. The social mobility within Sumerian society was also remarkable for its time. While social hierarchies were clearly defined, there was considerable opportunity for talented individuals to rise through the ranks. A skilled scribe could become a high government official. A successful merchant could gain wealth and influence. Even slaves could sometimes earn their freedom and establish themselves as productive members of society. Sumerian women, while living in a patriarchal society, enjoyed considerably more rights and freedoms than women in many later civilizations. They could own property, engage in business, serve as priestesses, and even occasionally rule as queens or regents. Some of the most beautiful Sumerian poetry was written by women, including the works of Enheduanna, who may have been the world's first known author whose name we can identify. The religious life of the Sumerians was rich and complex. involving not just formal temple worship but also personal devotion and community celebration. Their festivals marked the changing seasons, celebrated successful harvests, and honored the gods who they believed protected their cities. These celebrations brought entire communities together in shared joy and reverence, strengthening the social bonds that held their civilization together. The architectural achievements of the Sumerians were equally impressive. Their ziggurats, those distinctive stepped temple towers, were among the largest structures built by humans up to that time. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, built around 4,100 years ago, still stands today as a testament to Sumerian engineering skill and religious devotion. These buildings required sophisticated planning, advanced mathematics, and the coordination of hundreds of workers over many years. Sumerian craftsmanship reached levels of beauty and technical skill that would not be surpassed for centuries. Their jewelry, incorporating gold, silver, and precious stones, shows remarkable artistry. Their metalwork, including weapons, tools, and decorative objects, demonstrates advanced knowledge of alloying and forging techniques. Their textiles, while rarely preserved, are described in written records as being of extraordinary quality and beauty. The legacy of Sumerian civilization extends far beyond its immediate historical impact. The very concept of civilization, the idea that humans can organize themselves into complex, stable, and prosperous societies, was first proven possible by the Sumerians. Every city, every government, every written law, every school, and every temple that has existed since owes something to their pioneering efforts. Understanding why Sumer developed civilization first requires us to look beyond these 5 pillars to the unique conditions that made such innovations possible. What was special about this particular place and time that allowed humans to make such a tremendous leap forward? The answer lies in the geography and environment of ancient Mesopotamia, the land between the rivers, where the stage was perfectly set for humanity's greatest transformation. Close your eyes and imagine yourself floating high above the ancient world, looking down upon the earth as it existed 7,000 years ago. Below you stretches a landscape vastly different from the one we know today. Where modern cities now sprawl, pristine wilderness extends to every horizon. Where highways now connect distant places, only footpaths and animal trails wind through untouched forests and grasslands. Yet in one particular region, something extraordinary is beginning to stir. Look toward the place we now call the Middle East, and you will see 2 great rivers flowing like silver ribbons through a vast plain. The Tigris and Euphrates rivers descend from the highlands of what we now know as Turkey and Armenia, carrying with them the precious gift that would make civilization possible: fertile soil washed down from distant mountains, rich with the nutrients that plants need to flourish. This land between the rivers, which the ancient Greeks would later call Mesopotamia, possessed a unique combination of advantages that existed nowhere else on Earth at that time. The climate was warm, but not scorching, with enough rainfall to support plant growth but not so much as to create impenetrable jungles. The rivers provided not just water but also a means of transportation and communication between distant settlements. Most importantly, the annual floods of these rivers deposited layers of rich silt across the plains, creating some of the most fertile agricultural land the world has ever known. But the geography of Mesopotamia was not merely generous, it was also challenging in ways that would prove crucial for human development. The rivers that brought life could also bring destruction. Spring floods might wash away entire settlements if people were not prepared. Summer droughts could turn fertile fields into barren wasteland if water was not carefully conserved and distributed. The flat plains offered little natural protection from enemies or harsh weather. These challenges forced the people who settled here to develop new technologies, new forms of cooperation, and new ways of organizing their communities. The transformation of this landscape from wilderness to civilization began with a revolution in how humans obtained their food. For hundreds of thousands of years, our ancestors had lived as hunters and gatherers, following herds of animals and seasonal cycles of wild plants. They lived in small, mobile groups that could pack up and move whenever resources became scarce. This lifestyle, while sustainable, imposed strict limits on human development. Most of their time and energy had to be devoted to the immediate needs of survival, leaving little opportunity for other pursuits. Around 10,000 years ago, some human groups in the hills surrounding Mesopotamia began experimenting with a radically different approach to obtaining food. Instead of simply gathering wild grains like wheat and barley, they began deliberately planting and tending them. Instead of hunting wild sheep, goats, and cattle, they began capturing and domesticating them. This agricultural revolution, which archaeologists call the Neolithic transformation, would change everything about how humans lived. The earliest agricultural communities in the region were small villages nestled in the foothills where rainfall was sufficient to water their crops. Archaeological sites like Jarmo in modern-day Iraq show us communities of perhaps 150 people living in permanent houses, growing wheat and barley, and raising sheep and goats. These early farmers faced enormous challenges as they learned through trial and error how to select the best seeds, when to plant and harvest, and how to protect their crops from pests and weather. But as these agricultural techniques improved and spread, something remarkable began to happen. For the first time in human history, people could produce more food than they needed for immediate survival. A successful harvest might provide enough grain to last not just until the next growing season, but for several years. Herds of domesticated animals could provide a steady supply of meat, milk, and wool. This agricultural surplus was the foundation upon which all civilization would be built. As communities grew more successful at farming, they began to face a new challenge. The foothill regions where agriculture first developed could only support a limited population. But down in the river valleys, vast expanses of potentially fertile land lay waiting. The problem was that this land received little rainfall and was subject to unpredictable flooding. To farm successfully in the river plains would require innovations that went far beyond anything humans had attempted before. The solution came through one of humanity's greatest technological achievements: large-scale irrigation. Beginning around 7,000 years ago, the ancestors of the Sumerians began digging channels to carry water from the rivers to their fields. These early irrigation systems were simple affairs, perhaps just shallow ditches that could water a few acres during the flood season. But over generations, these systems grew larger and more sophisticated. Imagine standing beside one of these early irrigation canals on a warm morning around 6,000 years ago. The sun is just rising, casting long shadows across fields of green barley that stretch to the horizon. You can hear the gentle sound of water flowing through carefully constructed channels, carrying life to crops that could never survive on rainfall alone. Farmers are already at work, some adjusting wooden gates that control the flow of water, others walking through their fields to check on the progress of their plants. This scene represents one of the most important moments in human history. These farmers have accomplished something that no previous generation had ever imagined possible. They have taken control of their environment in a way that allows them to feed not just themselves and their families, but hundreds of other people as well. They have created the agricultural surplus that will make civilization possible. The development of irrigation required new levels of cooperation and organization. A single family might dig a small channel to water their own plot, but the major canals that could transform entire regions required the coordinated effort of entire communities. People had to agree on where to dig, how to share the water, and how to maintain the system. They needed leaders who could organize work projects and settle disputes. They needed specialists who could design and build increasingly complex hydraulic systems. Over time, these irrigation networks grew to incredible size and sophistication. By 4,000 years ago, the Sumerian irrigation system included thousands of miles of canals, some large enough for boats to navigate, others precisely engineered to deliver exactly the right amount of water to specific fields. The management of this system required detailed record-keeping, careful planning, and complex legal agreements between different communities. The crops that the Sumerians grew were themselves the result of thousands of years of careful selection and improvement. The wild ancestors of wheat and barley produced small, scattered seeds that were difficult to harvest and process. Through countless generations of choosing the best plants for the next year's seed, farmers gradually developed varieties that produced large, easily harvested grains. They learned to grow legumes like lentils and chickpeas that helped restore nutrients to the soil. They cultivated date palms that provided sweet fruit and strong wood for construction. The domestication of animals was equally important and equally challenging. The wild ancestors of cattle, sheep, and goats were often aggressive and difficult to control. Early herders had to learn how to select the most docile animals for breeding, how to provide adequate food and shelter, and how to protect their flocks from predators and diseases. Over time, they developed breeds that were not only easier to manage but also more productive, providing more milk, better wool, and more meat than their wild ancestors. The agricultural surplus produced by these innovations had profound effects on human society. For the first time, not everyone needed to spend their days producing food. Some people could specialize in making tools, others in creating pottery, still others in trading with distant communities. This specialization led to rapid improvements in technology and the development of increasingly sophisticated crafts. Agricultural surplus also made it possible for communities to support larger populations. Villages that might have housed 50 people as hunter-gatherers could now support 500 or even 5,000 as farmers. These growing populations, in turn, provided the labor force necessary for even more ambitious projects, larger irrigation systems, bigger buildings, and more extensive trade networks. The social changes that accompanied agricultural development were equally revolutionary. Permanent settlements meant that people could accumulate possessions and build more substantial homes. The need to organize irrigation systems and coordinate agricultural work led to the development of formal leadership roles. The ability to store surplus grain created new forms of wealth and new sources of power. The storage of grain itself became a sophisticated science. The Sumerians developed large granaries with carefully designed ventilation systems to prevent spoilage. They learned to treat grain with natural substances that would repel insects and rodents. They created detailed record-keeping systems to track what was stored, when it was deposited, and who was entitled to withdraw it. These granaries became some of the most important buildings in Sumerian cities, heavily guarded and carefully maintained. The management of agricultural resources also led to the development of the world's first systems of weights and measures. When farmers needed to trade surplus grain for tools, pottery, or other goods, they needed agreed-upon standards for measuring quantities. The Sumerians created standardized units for volume, weight, and distance that allowed for fair and consistent trade. These measurement systems were so well designed that variations of them were used throughout Mesopotamia for thousands of years. The seasonal rhythms of agricultural life profoundly influenced Sumerian culture and religion. The annual cycle of planting, growing, and harvesting became the framework around which their entire society was organized. Religious festivals marked the key moments in the agricultural year: the spring planting, the summer growth, the autumn harvest, and the winter rest. The gods themselves were understood to participate in this cycle, with deities of fertility ensuring good crops and deities of storms and floods bringing both destruction and renewal. The agricultural year began with the winter rains that softened the soil and prepared it for planting. As the flood season approached in late spring, farmers would prepare their fields and irrigation channels. The annual flood was both a blessing and a danger. Too little flooding meant insufficient water for the crops and not enough fresh silt to maintain soil fertility. Too much flooding could wash away crops, homes, and even entire settlements. Sumerian farmers learned to read the subtle signs that predicted the nature of each year's flood. They observed the color and clarity of the river water, the behavior of birds and fish, and the patterns of weather in the distant mountains where the rivers began. This accumulated knowledge allowed them to prepare appropriately for each growing season, adjusting their planting schedules and irrigation strategies based on their predictions of water availability. The actual work of farming in ancient Sumer was a community effort that brought together people of all ages and social classes. During planting season, entire families would work in the fields, preparing the soil with wooden plows pulled by oxen, carefully placing seeds in furrows, and ensuring that the irrigation channels were properly aligned. Children helped by scaring away birds and small animals that might eat the planted seeds. As the crops grew through the long, hot summer months, the work shifted to maintaining the irrigation system and protecting the plants from pests and diseases. Farmers developed an impressive knowledge of natural pest control, using companion planting, beneficial insects, and organic treatments to keep their crops healthy. They learned to rotate crops to prevent soil depletion and to intercrop different plants in ways that maximized productivity. The harvest season was the culmination of the agricultural year, a time of intense work but also great celebration. Entire communities would mobilize to gather the ripened grain before it could be damaged by weather or pests. The work was hard, with long days of cutting grain with stone or bronze sickles, bundling it for transport, and processing it to separate the edible seeds from the chaff. But the harvest was also a time of joy and thanksgiving. Families who had worked hard all year could finally see the fruits of their labor. Successful harvests were celebrated with feasts, festivals, and religious ceremonies thanking the gods for their generosity. These celebrations strengthened community bonds and provided a welcome break from the constant demands of agricultural work. The tools and techniques that Sumerian farmers developed were remarkably sophisticated and effective. Their plows, initially simple wooden implements, gradually evolved into complex devices with metal tips that could break through hard soil and create precise furrows. They developed threshing sledges with sharp stones embedded in the bottom that could efficiently separate grain from stalks. They created winnowing baskets that used wind to separate grain from chaff. Sumerian farmers also became experts in animal husbandry, developing techniques for breeding, feeding, and managing livestock that would remain largely unchanged for thousands of years. They learned to select animals with desirable traits for breeding, to provide appropriate nutrition for different types of livestock, and to prevent and treat common diseases. Their cattle provided not only meat and milk, but also labor for plowing and transportation. Their sheep and goats provided meat, milk, wool, and leather. Even their pigs, which were less common but still important, provided meat and helped clear fields of crop residues. The integration of crop farming and animal husbandry created sustainable agricultural systems that could maintain their productivity for generations. Animal manure provided fertilizer for the crops, while crop residues provided food for the animals. This closed-loop system minimized waste and maximized productivity, allowing Sumerian farmers to support increasingly large populations on the same amount of land. Perhaps most importantly, agricultural surplus gave people time to think, to experiment, and to innovate. A hunter-gatherer who spent 12 hours a day finding food had little opportunity to develop new technologies or explore abstract ideas. A farmer who could feed his family with just a few hours of work each day had time to learn new skills, create art, and ponder the mysteries of existence. This newfound leisure time led to an explosion of human creativity and innovation. Potters had time to experiment with new techniques and create increasingly beautiful and functional vessels. Metalworkers could perfect their craft and develop new alloys and tools. Weavers could create increasingly complex and beautiful textiles. Artists could develop new forms of expression, from sculpture to music to literature. The agricultural revolution also made possible the development of long-distance trade. Communities that produced surpluses of particular goods could trade them for products that were not available locally. Sumerian farmers might trade their grain for copper from distant mountains, precious stones from far-off deserts, or exotic woods from remote forests. This trade brought new ideas, new technologies, and new cultural influences that enriched Sumerian civilization. The environmental impact of Sumerian agriculture was profound and lasting. The extensive irrigation systems they created transformed vast areas of desert and marshland into productive farmland. However, this transformation was not without costs. Over time, intensive irrigation led to the accumulation of salt in the soil, a process called salinization that gradually reduced crop yields. The Sumerians learned to manage this problem through careful water management and crop rotation, but it remained a constant challenge. The agricultural revolution that began in the hills around Mesopotamia and reached its fullest expression in the Sumerian irrigation systems was the essential prerequisite for everything that would follow. Without the ability to produce food surpluses, there could be no cities, no governments, no writing systems, no temples, and no civilization. The patient work of countless generations of farmers, gradually improving their crops and their techniques, created the foundation upon which the Sumerians would build humanity's first great urban centers. As we drift gently towards sleep, imagine those ancient fields under the starlit sky. the soft sound of water flowing through irrigation channels, and the quiet satisfaction of people who had learned to work with nature to create abundance from the earth. Picture the gentle lowing of cattle in their pens, the rustle of grain in storage buildings, and the peaceful sleep of farmers who knew they had created something that would feed their families and their communities for years to come. These peaceful scenes of agricultural life were the true beginning of the human story as we know it today, the moment when our species first glimpsed its potential to reshape the world through intelligence, cooperation, and determination. From these fertile fields would soon rise the world's first cities, towers of human ambition reaching toward the heavens, beginning with the magnificent city of Uruk, humanity's first true urban center. Imagine yourself standing on a gentle rise in the Mesopotamian plain around 5,000 years ago, looking out across a landscape that would forever change the meaning of human community. In the distance, rising from the flat expanse of irrigated fields and palm groves, you see something that has never existed before in the history of our species. Massive walls of sun-dried brick stretch across the horizon, enclosing an area so vast that you cannot see from one end to the other. Within those walls, countless plumes of smoke rise from cooking fires, workshops, and kilns, creating a haze that speaks of thousands upon thousands of people living and working together in harmony. This is Uruk, humanity's first true city, a settlement so revolutionary in its scope and organization that it would serve as the model for urban life for all time to come. Founded around 4,500 years before our era, Uruk grew from a modest farming village into something unprecedented, a community of perhaps 50,000 souls, all living within the protection of those mighty walls, all participating in a complex society that was far more than the sum of its parts. The story of Uruk's growth is the story of human ambition made manifest in brick and stone. Archaeological evidence painstakingly uncovered by the German Archaeological Institute since 1928 reveals a settlement that expanded in carefully planned stages over more than 1,000 years. Each generation of Urukians built upon the achievements of their predecessors, gradually transforming their home from a large village into humanity's first metropolis. To understand the magnitude of this achievement, consider that for hundreds of thousands of years, human beings had lived in groups that rarely exceeded 150 individuals. This number, which anthropologists now call Dunbar's number, represents the maximum size of a community that can function through personal relationships, and informal leadership. Beyond this size, more complex forms of organization become necessary. Uruk shattered this ancient limitation, creating a community that was hundreds of times larger than anything that had existed before. The physical layout of Uruk reveals the sophisticated planning that made such a large community possible. The city was divided into distinct districts, each serving specific functions within the urban ecosystem. Near the center stood the temple precincts, dominated by massive ziggurats that could be seen from miles away. These sacred areas were not just places of worship, but served as the administrative and economic heart of the city, where priests and officials coordinated the activities of the entire community. Surrounding the temple districts were residential neighborhoods, carefully planned with narrow streets that provided shade during the hot summer months, and wide enough to allow the passage of donkey carts carrying goods and supplies. Houses were built around central courtyards that provided private space for families, while maintaining the social connections that held the community together. The wealthy lived in larger homes with multiple rooms and elaborate decorations, while craftsmen and farmers occupied smaller but still comfortable dwellings. The workshops and industrial areas of Uruk were marvels of early urban planning. Potters, metalworkers, weavers, and other craftsmen were grouped together in specialized districts where they could share resources, techniques, and customers. The sounds and smells of their work filled the air, the rhythmic pounding of hammers on metal, the gentle whir of pottery wheels, the click of looms creating beautiful textiles, and the aromatic smoke from kilns firing ceramic vessels. Perhaps most impressive were the city's walls, massive fortifications that stretched for over 6 miles around the entire settlement. These walls, built of millions of sun-dried bricks, were not just defensive structures but symbols of the community's unity and determination. Every citizen of Uruk contributed to their construction and maintenance, whether through labor, materials, or taxation. The walls created a clear boundary between the civilized world within and the wilderness beyond, defining Uruk as a distinct entity with its own identity and destiny. The population of Uruk at its height, around 3,200 years before our era, probably approached 50,000 people. To put this in perspective, this was larger than most European cities would be until the Middle Ages, over 4,000 years later. Managing such a population required innovations in every aspect of human organization, from food distribution to waste management, from conflict resolution to public works coordination. The administration of Uruk was centered in the great temple complexes, particularly the Iana district dedicated to the goddess Inanna, and the Anu district sacred to the sky god Anu. These were not just religious sites, but served as the city's government buildings, treasuries, schools, and record-keeping centers. The priests who served in these temples were among the most educated and capable members of society, responsible for maintaining the complex systems that kept the city functioning. The economic life of Uruk was equally sophisticated, based on a combination of agricultural surplus from the surrounding countryside and specialized craft production within the city walls. Farmers in villages throughout the region brought their excess grain, dates, and livestock to Uruk's markets, trading them for tools, pottery, textiles, and other manufactured goods produced by the city's craftsmen. This exchange created a symbiotic relationship between urban and rural areas that would become the foundation of all future civilizations. The marketplaces of Uruk were wonders to behold, bustling centers of commerce where goods from across the known world could be found. Merchants brought copper from the distant mountains of Anatolia, precious stones from the highlands of Iran, exotic woods from the forests of Lebanon, and shells from the Persian Gulf. The diversity of goods available in Uruk's markets was unprecedented in human history, offering residents a quality of life that would have seemed miraculous to their ancestors. The social life of Uruk was equally rich and complex. The city's size allowed for a level of specialization that was impossible in smaller communities. There were professional musicians who entertained at festivals and religious ceremonies, skilled artists who created beautiful sculptures and paintings, storytellers who preserved and transmitted the community's cultural heritage, and scholars who developed new knowledge in mathematics, astronomy, and other fields. The religious life of Uruk centered around the great temples, but it extended into every aspect of daily life. The gods were understood to be active participants in the city's affairs, requiring constant attention and offerings to ensure their continued favor. Religious festivals brought the entire community together in celebration, strengthening the social bonds that held this vast population together. These celebrations were not just spiritual events, but also important economic and social occasions that reinforced Uruk's identity as a unified community. The technological innovations that emerged from Uruk were revolutionary. The city's craftsmen developed the potter's wheel, which allowed for the mass production of high-quality ceramic vessels. They created the cylinder seal, a small carved stone that could be rolled across clay to create distinctive marks indicating ownership or authority. They perfected techniques for working with metals, creating tools and weapons that were far superior to anything available to their rural neighbors. Perhaps most importantly, Uruk was the birthplace of writing. The need to keep track of the complex economic transactions that sustained such a large population led to the development of the world's first writing system. Initially used for simple record-keeping, this system gradually evolved into a sophisticated means of communication that could preserve laws, stories, religious texts, and scientific knowledge for future generations. The daily life of an ordinary Uruk citizen would have been both familiar and strange to modern eyes. They woke with the sun and went to bed shortly after sunset, their days structured around work, family, and community obligations. Children played games not unlike those played today, while their parents worked in fields, workshops, or administrative offices. Families gathered for meals of bread, beer, vegetables, and occasional meat, sharing news and stories that bound them together across generations. The streets of Uruk were alive with activity from dawn to dusk. Merchants called out their wares, children ran through the narrow passages playing games, craftsmen worked in open-air workshops where passers-by could watch their skilled hands creating beautiful objects. The city had its own rhythm, its own heartbeat, created by the coordinated activities of thousands of individuals all working toward common goals. The water supply system of Uruk was an engineering marvel that ensured the city's survival in the arid Mesopotamian climate. Canals brought fresh water from the nearby Euphrates River, while sophisticated drainage systems carried away waste and excess water. Public wells and cisterns provided accessible water sources throughout the city, while private homes of the wealthy often included their own water storage facilities. The architecture of Uruk reflected both practical needs and aesthetic ambitions. The great temples were decorated with intricate mosaics made from colored stones and shells, creating patterns and images that celebrated the gods and the community's achievements. Even ordinary homes included decorative elements that expressed the residents' pride in their city and their prosperity. The educational system that developed in Uruk was humanity's first formal approach to transmitting knowledge across generations. Schools, attached to the great temples, taught young people to read and write, to perform mathematical calculations, and to understand the religious and cultural traditions that defined their society. These schools produced the scribes, administrators, and priests who kept Uruk functioning as a complex urban community. The influence of Uruk extended far beyond its walls. The city's success inspired the development of other urban centers throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. The technologies, organizational systems, and cultural innovations that emerged from Uruk spread throughout the ancient world, providing the foundation for all subsequent civilizations. Even today, the basic concepts of urban planning, specialized labor, formal education, and written communication that we take for granted can be traced back to the innovations of ancient Uruk. The excavations at Uruk, which have continued for nearly a century, have revealed layer upon layer of human occupation, each generation building upon the achievements of their predecessors. The artifacts recovered from these excavations, now housed in museums around the world, tell the story of humanity's first great experiment in urban living. From simple pottery sherds to elaborate works of art, from mundane administrative records to profound religious texts, these discoveries illuminate the lives and achievements of people who lived thousands of years ago, but whose innovations continue to shape our world today. The White Temple, one of Uruk's most remarkable structures, stands as a testament to the architectural ambitions of its builders. Constructed around 3,400 years before our era, this limestone building was raised on a massive platform that elevated it above the surrounding city. Its walls were decorated with intricate patterns of colored cones pressed into the plaster, creating geometric designs that caught and reflected the light throughout the day. The temple's interior, though simple by later standards, was revolutionary for its time, featuring the world's first examples of architectural elements that would become standard in religious buildings for millennia to come. The Inanna precinct, dedicated to the goddess Inanna, was perhaps even more impressive in its scope and complexity. This vast temple complex covered several acres and included multiple buildings connected by courtyards, ceremonial walkways, and gardens. The main temple was rebuilt and expanded numerous times over the centuries, each reconstruction more elaborate than the last. Archaeological evidence suggests that thousands of people worked in this complex, not just as priests and religious officials, but as administrators, craftsmen, farmers, and laborers who maintained the vast estates that supported the temple's activities. The daily rhythm of life in Uruk was governed by both practical necessities and religious observances. The city awakened before dawn with the sound of temple bells and horns calling people to prayer and work. As the sun rose, the streets filled with people heading to their various occupations. Farmers departed through the city gates to tend fields in the surrounding countryside, while craftsmen opened their workshops and merchants prepared their stalls for another day of trade. The breakfast of an average Uruk family might consist of flatbread baked from barley flour, accompanied by dates, onions, and perhaps a small portion of cheese or fish. Beer, brewed from barley and flavored with various herbs and spices, was the most common beverage for adults, while children drank water or milk. These simple meals were often shared with neighbors and extended family members, reinforcing the social bonds that held the community together. The workday in Uruk varied greatly depending on one's occupation and social status. Wealthy landowners might spend their mornings inspecting their properties and meeting with administrators, while their afternoons were devoted to religious observances or social gatherings. Craftsmen worked long hours in their workshops, their skilled hands creating the pottery, textiles, and metal goods that were traded throughout the region. Farmers faced the hardest physical labor, tending crops under the hot Mesopotamian sun or maintaining the complex irrigation systems that kept the city fed. The marketplace activity reached its peak during the middle hours of the day, when the sun was high and the heat made outdoor work difficult. Merchants from distant lands displayed their exotic wares under canvas awnings that provided blessed shade. The air was filled with the calls of vendors, the bleating of sheep and goats, and the constant murmur of negotiation and conversation. Children darted between the stalls, running errands for their parents or simply marveling at the incredible variety of goods available in their remarkable city. Education in Uruk was a privilege reserved primarily for the sons of wealthy families, though some daughters of the elite also received formal instruction. The schools, located within or near the great temple complexes, taught students to read and write cuneiform script, to perform mathematical calculations necessary for trade and administration, and to understand the religious and legal traditions that governed their society. Students spent years copying classical texts, memorizing prayers and hymns, and learning the proper procedures for various ceremonies and rituals. The evening hours in Uruk were times for family gathering and community socializing. As the heat of the day began to subside, people emerged from their homes and workshops to enjoy the cooler air. Children played games in the streets and courtyards, their laughter echoing off the walls of houses and temples. Adults gathered in small groups to share news, discuss business, or simply enjoy each other's company. The wealthy might host elaborate dinner parties featuring musicians, dancers, and storytellers, while ordinary families enjoyed simpler but equally meaningful gatherings around their evening meals. The festivals and religious celebrations of Uruk were spectacular affairs that brought the entire community together in shared joy and reverence. The New Year festival, celebrating the annual flooding of the rivers and the beginning of the agricultural cycle, lasted for several days and included processions, theatrical performances, ritual marriages between priests and priestesses representing the gods, and communal feasts that reinforced social bonds across all levels of society. The sacred marriage ceremony, in which the king or high priest symbolically wed the goddess Inanna, was one of Uruk's most important religious observances. This ritual, believed to ensure the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the city, involved elaborate preparations that engaged the entire community. Craftsmen created special ceremonial objects, musicians composed new songs and hymns, and ordinary citizens contributed food and labor to make the celebration possible. The technological workshops of Uruk were centers of innovation that pushed the boundaries of human capability. The pottery workshops produced vessels of unprecedented size and sophistication, including massive storage jars that could hold hundreds of gallons of grain or oil. The metalworking shops created tools and weapons using advanced techniques of alloying and forging that would not be surpassed for centuries. The textile workshops produced fabrics of such quality and beauty that they were prized throughout the ancient world. The administrative system that governed Uruk was remarkably sophisticated, involving multiple levels of authority and specialized roles that ensured the city functioned smoothly. At the apex were the high priests and the king, who made major decisions affecting the entire community. Below them were various officials responsible for specific aspects of city life. Temple administrators who managed religious affairs and economic activities, military commanders who organized defense and public works projects, and scribes who maintained the records that kept track of everything from tax collections to grain distributions. The legal system of Uruk, while not as formally codified as later Mesopotamian law codes, nonetheless provided mechanisms for resolving disputes and maintaining order within the community. Elders and priests served as judges in cases involving property disputes, marriage arrangements, and criminal accusations. The punishments they imposed were designed not just to punish wrongdoers, but to restore harmony to the community and compensate victims for their losses. The international connections of Uruk were extensive and sophisticated, involving trade relationships that stretched across hundreds of miles. Archaeological evidence shows that Uruk merchants established trading colonies in distant regions, creating networks that brought exotic goods and new ideas back to their home city. These connections exposed Uruk's residents to different cultures, technologies, and ways of thinking that enriched their own civilization and accelerated its development. The artistic achievements of Uruk were remarkable for their beauty and technical sophistication. Sculptors created statues and reliefs that captured both the physical appearance and the spiritual essence of gods, kings, and ordinary people. Painters decorated temple walls and ceremonial objects with scenes that told stories of religious myths, historical events, and daily life. Musicians developed complex compositions that accompanied religious ceremonies and public celebrations, creating sounds that lifted the spirits and united the community in shared emotional experiences. The architectural legacy of Uruk extended far beyond its own walls, influencing the design of cities throughout Mesopotamia and beyond. The basic elements of Uruk's urban plan, including the central temple complex, surrounding residential districts, specialized craft areas, and defensive walls, became the standard model for urban development that would be followed for thousands of years. As you settle into peaceful sleep, imagine the gentle sounds of ancient Uruk at twilight, the lowing of cattle being brought in from the fields, the laughter of children playing in the courtyards, the soft voices of families sharing their evening meals, and the distant chanting from the great temples where priests offered prayers for the city's continued prosperity. Picture the warm glow of oil lamps beginning to flicker in windows as darkness falls, and the gradual quieting of the bustling streets as the great city settles into peaceful rest. This was humanity's first great urban experiment, a bold leap into a new way of living that would transform our species forever. The innovations that emerged from Uruk, from urban planning to specialized crafts, from formal education to complex administration, created the foundation upon which all subsequent civilizations would build. From this remarkable city would emerge one of humanity's greatest innovations, the art of writing, which would allow human thoughts and achievements to transcend the boundaries of time and space, beginning with the wedge-shaped marks we know as cuneiform. Picture a moment that changed the world forever, though those who witnessed it could never have imagined its significance. In a quiet corner of a temple complex in ancient Uruk, around 3,300 years before our era, a temple administrator sits cross-legged on a reed mat, a smooth tablet of damp clay resting on his lap. Before him lie several small clay tokens, each one representing a specific quantity of grain or livestock. He has been using these tokens for years to keep track of the temple's vast stores of food and goods, but today he faces a problem that will lead to humanity's greatest intellectual breakthrough. The harvest has been exceptionally good this year, and the temple's warehouses are overflowing with barley, wheat, dates, and other provisions. The number of tokens needed to represent all these goods has become unwieldy, and the administrator worries about losing or confusing them. As he contemplates this challenge, an idea begins to form in his mind. Instead of using physical tokens that can be lost or damaged, why not press the shapes of the tokens into the clay itself, creating permanent marks that will preserve the information forever? With careful deliberation, he picks up a reed stylus, its end cut to form a wedge shape, and begins to press it into the soft clay. He creates simple pictographs, stylized drawings that represent the goods he needs to record. A circle with lines radiating from it represents the sun, which means day or time. A triangular shape represents grain. Simple tally marks indicate quantities. These marks, pressed into clay that will harden and preserve his records for thousands of years, represent the first true writing in human history. This humble beginning would grow into cuneiform, the wedge-shaped writing system that would dominate the ancient Middle East for over 3,000 years. The word cuneiform itself comes from the Latin word cuneus, meaning wedge, a reference to the distinctive triangular marks created by pressing a reed stylus into clay. What began as simple record-keeping would evolve into a sophisticated system capable of expressing the full range of human thought and emotion. The earliest cuneiform tablets, dating from around 3,300 to 3,000 years before our era, were purely practical documents. They recorded the movement of goods in and out of temple storehouses, tracked the payment of taxes and tribute, and documented business transactions between merchants. These tablets might seem mundane to modern eyes, but they represent one of the most revolutionary developments in human history, the ability to preserve information beyond the limits of human memory. Consider the magnitude of this achievement. For hundreds of thousands of years, human knowledge had been limited by the capacity of individual minds to remember and the ability of people to pass information orally from one generation to the next. Important knowledge could be lost if the people who held it died unexpectedly. Complex information could become distorted as it passed from person to person. The invention of writing changed all of this, creating a permanent external form of memory that could preserve human thoughts and knowledge indefinitely. The physical process of creating cuneiform writing was both simple and elegant. Scribes worked with tablets of clay that had been mixed with water to achieve the perfect consistency, soft enough to receive impressions but firm enough to hold their shape. The reed stylus, cut from the stems of plants that grew abundantly along the Euphrates and Tigris rivers, was held at an angle to create the distinctive wedge-shaped marks that gave the writing system its name. The earliest cuneiform signs were pictographic, meaning they looked like simplified drawings of the things they represented. A stylized picture of a bird meant bird, a drawing of a fish meant fish, and so on. But as the writing system evolved, it became increasingly abstract and sophisticated. Signs began to represent not just concrete objects but also abstract concepts and the sounds of spoken language. A sign that originally meant mouth could also represent the concept of speaking or even be used phonetically to represent the sound made by that word in the Sumerian language. The development of phonetic writing, in which signs represent sounds rather than meanings, was a crucial breakthrough that transformed cuneiform from a simple record-keeping system into a full writing system capable of representing any spoken utterance. This development allowed scribes to write down not just lists of goods and quantities, but also laws, stories, prayers, letters, and scientific observations. The full richness of human expression could now be captured in permanent form. Learning to read and write cuneiform was a complex and time-consuming process that required years of dedicated study. Students began their education as young children, typically sons of wealthy families who could afford to send them to the tablet schools attached to temples. These schools, called eduba or tablet houses, were humanity's first formal educational institutions, and they established patterns of teaching and learning that would influence education for millennia to come. The curriculum in a Sumerian school was rigorous and comprehensive. Students began by learning to form the basic wedge shapes that comprised all cuneiform signs, practicing for hours each day until they could create clean, precise marks in the clay. They then progressed to copying simple word lists, learning the meanings and pronunciations of hundreds of individual signs. As their skills developed, they began copying literary works, mathematical problems, and legal documents, gradually building their knowledge of both the writing system and the broader culture it preserved. The daily life of a student scribe was structured and demanding. They arrived at school before dawn, when the clay was at its most workable consistency after the cool night air. Their first task was often to prepare their own writing materials, mixing clay with water and tempering to achieve the proper texture, and cutting fresh reed styluses to replace those that had become worn or damaged. They worked by the light of oil lamps or, when possible, in open courtyards where natural light could illuminate their tablets. The master scribes who taught in these schools were among the most respected members of Sumerian society. They were not just teachers, but also scholars, preserving and transmitting the accumulated knowledge of their civilization. Many were also creative writers themselves, composing original works of poetry, religious texts, and scientific treatises that expanded the boundaries of human knowledge and expression. The subjects taught in Sumerian schools extended far beyond basic literacy. Students learned mathematics, including sophisticated techniques for calculating areas, volumes, and compound interest that were essential for managing the complex economic systems of their society. They studied astronomy, tracking the movements of celestial bodies and developing calendar systems that could predict the optimal times for planting and harvesting. They learned law, memorizing the precedents and procedures that governed their society. Perhaps most importantly, they studied literature, copying and memorizing the great epic poems, hymns, and stories that embodied their culture's deepest values and beliefs. These literary works were not just entertainment, but served as repositories of wisdom, moral instruction, and cultural identity that bound the Sumerian people together across time and space. The physical act of writing on clay tablets required considerable skill and patience. The clay had to be prepared to exactly the right consistency, neither too wet nor too dry. Too much moisture would cause the tablet to deform when pressed, while too little would make it difficult to create clear impressions. The scribe had to work quickly but carefully, completing the tablet before the clay dried and hardened beyond the point where corrections could be made. When a tablet was completed, it was often left to dry in the sun, which hardened the clay and made the writing permanent. For particularly important documents, tablets might be baked in kilns, creating a ceramic hardness that could preserve the writing for thousands of years. Many of these fired tablets have survived to the present day, allowing modern scholars to read the thoughts and words of people who lived over 4,000 years ago. The organization and storage of cuneiform tablets was itself a sophisticated science. Temple and palace archives contained thousands of tablets organized by subject, date, and importance. Scribes developed elaborate cataloging systems that allowed them to locate specific documents among vast collections. They created summary tablets that listed the contents of entire archives, making it possible to find information quickly when needed. The decipherment of cuneiform in the 19th century was one of the greatest intellectual achievements of modern archaeology. For over 1,000 years after the last cuneiform texts were written, the knowledge of how to read this ancient script was completely lost. The wedge-shaped marks on clay tablets and stone monuments remained mysterious and unreadable, silent witnesses to civilizations that had vanished from memory. The breakthrough came through the patient work of scholars like Sir Henry Rawlinson, who in the 1830s began studying the great trilingual inscription carved into the cliff face at Behistun in modern-day Iran. This inscription, created by the Persian king Darius I around 500 years before our era, contained the same text written in 3 different languages and scripts: Old Persian, Babylonian, and Elamite, all using cuneiform writing. By comparing these 3 versions and using his knowledge of Old Persian names and words, Rawlinson was able to identify the phonetic values of many cuneiform signs. This work provided the key that unlocked thousands of years of written records, revealing the voices of ancient Sumerians, Babylonians, and Assyrians who had been silent for millennia. The Kish tablet, discovered in the early 20th century at the ancient Sumerian city of Kish, represents one of the oldest examples of true writing yet discovered. Dating from approximately 3,400 years before our era, this small clay tablet contains a list of goods and their quantities, written in the earliest form of cuneiform script. Though its contents are mundane, recording deliveries of barley and other commodities, it represents a pivotal moment in human development. The tablets from the Uruk archives, excavated by German archaeologists, provide an even more comprehensive picture of early writing. These thousands of tablets, dating from the late 4th millennium before our era, document the complex economic and administrative systems that made urban civilization possible. They record everything from tax collections to religious offerings, from land sales to court decisions, creating a detailed portrait of life in humanity's first city. As cuneiform writing spread throughout Mesopotamia and beyond, it was adapted to write many different languages. The Akkadians, who conquered much of Sumer around 2,300 years before our era, adapted cuneiform to write their Semitic language, creating new signs and modifying existing ones to accommodate different sounds and grammatical structures. Later, the Babylonians, Assyrians, Hittites, and even the Persians would use variations of cuneiform to preserve their own languages and cultures. The influence of cuneiform writing extended far beyond Mesopotamia. The basic concept of using written symbols to represent spoken language spread to other regions, inspiring the development of Egyptian hieroglyphs, the Indus Valley script, and eventually the alphabetic writing systems that we use today. Every time you read these words, you are participating in a tradition that began with those first tentative marks pressed into clay tablets in ancient Uruk. The social impact of writing was profound and far-reaching. The ability to create permanent records transformed law, allowing for the development of detailed legal codes that could be consulted and enforced consistently over time. It revolutionized commerce, making possible complex business arrangements that extended over long periods and great distances. It transformed religion, allowing for the preservation of sacred texts and the standardization of religious practices across different communities. Perhaps most importantly, writing created the possibility of literature, the use of language not just for practical communication, but for artistic expression and the exploration of the deepest questions of human existence. The earliest Sumerian literature included hymns and prayers that expressed profound spiritual insights, epic poems that told of heroic adventures and moral struggles, and wisdom literature that offered guidance for living a good and meaningful life. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, imagine a Sumerian scribe working by lamplight in the quiet hours after the bustling city has settled into rest. The soft scraping of reed on clay provides a gentle rhythm as thoughts and words take permanent form for the first time in human history. The flickering flame casts dancing shadows on the tablet as wedge-shaped marks accumulate, each one representing a sound, a word, an idea that will survive long after its creator has returned to dust. This moment, repeated countless times across generations of scribes, represents humanity's greatest leap forward, the moment when our thoughts first became immortal. Through writing, the wisdom of the ancients could speak across centuries, the laws of kings could govern long after their deaths, and the dreams of poets could inspire people not yet born. From these simple beginnings would flow rivers of literature, beginning with humanity's first great epic tale, the story of Gilgamesh, king of Uruk, whose adventures would become the template for heroic literature throughout the ages. In the quiet hour before dawn in ancient Sumer, when the morning stars still gleamed in the eastern sky and the first birds had not yet begun their songs, the great temples awakened to life. From the towering ziggurats that dominated every Sumerian city, the sound of bronze bells and wooden clappers called the faithful to prayer, their gentle resonance carrying across the sleeping neighborhoods below. This daily ritual, repeated for over 1,000 years, marked the beginning of each new day in a civilization where the sacred and the everyday were woven together into a single seamless tapestry. The temples of Sumer were far more than places of worship. They were the beating hearts of their communities, serving simultaneously as religious centers, government buildings, schools, banks, workshops, and social gathering places. To understand Sumerian civilization, one must first understand these remarkable institutions that stood at the center of every aspect of Sumerian life, connecting the earthly concerns of daily existence with the eternal realm of the gods. The most visible and impressive of these religious structures were the ziggurats, those distinctive stepped pyramid temples that rose like artificial mountains from the flat Mesopotamian plain. The word ziggurat comes from the Akkadian word zikuratu, meaning pinnacle or mountaintop, reflecting their symbolic function as bridges between earth and heaven. These massive structures, built entirely of sun-dried and fired bricks, required the coordinated labor of thousands of workers over many years, representing some of the largest construction projects undertaken by ancient humanity. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, built during the reign of Ur-Nammu around 2,100 years before our era, still stands today as a testament to Sumerian architectural ambition and religious devotion. Rising in 3 great steps to a height of over 70 feet, this massive structure was originally topped by a small temple where the god Nanna, patron deity of Ur, was believed to descend from heaven to meet with his priests and receive the offerings of his people. Imagine yourself approaching this magnificent structure on a festival day 4,000 years ago. The ziggurat's walls, originally covered with glazed bricks in brilliant blue and gold, gleam in the morning sunlight like a jewel set against the brown landscape of the surrounding city. Pilgrims from throughout the region climb the great staircases that lead to the temple at the summit, their voices raised in hymns of praise that have been sung for countless generations. The religious worldview of the Sumerians was complex and sophisticated, involving a pantheon of gods and goddesses who governed every aspect of existence. At the head of this divine hierarchy stood Anu, the sky god, whose temple at Uruk was one of the most ancient and revered shrines in all of Mesopotamia. Below him were Enlil, god of wind and storms, who commanded the forces of nature that could bring both life-giving rains and devastating floods, and Enki, god of fresh water and wisdom, who taught humanity the arts of civilization and protected them from the sometimes harsh decrees of the other gods. The goddess Inanna, known to later peoples as Ishtar, held a special place in Sumerian religion as the deity of love, fertility, and warfare. Her great temple complex at Uruk, called the Iana, or House of Heaven, was one of the largest and most elaborate religious installations in the ancient world. Here, priestesses performed sacred rituals that were believed to ensure the fertility of the land and the prosperity of the people. The ceremonies dedicated to Inanna were among the most spectacular and emotionally powerful events in Sumerian religious life. Each Sumerian city had its own patron deity, a god or goddess who was believed to have founded the settlement and who continued to protect and guide its inhabitants. This personal relationship between city and deity created a strong sense of civic identity and religious obligation. The people of Ur served Nana, the moon god, while the citizens of Uruk honored both Anu and Inanna. The residents of Nippur, considered the most sacred of all Sumerian cities, were blessed to serve Enlil, the king of the gods. The daily operation of these temples required the services of hundreds of people organized into elaborate hierarchies of religious officials. At the apex stood the high priests and priestesses, individuals chosen for their wisdom, piety, and often their noble birth, who served as the primary intermediaries between the human and divine realms. These religious leaders were responsible for ensuring that the daily rituals were performed correctly, that the gods received their proper offerings, and that the divine will was interpreted and communicated to the people. Below the high priests were numerous specialized religious officials, each with specific duties and responsibilities. Temple singers led the community in hymns and chants that had been composed by inspired poets and passed down through generations of religious tradition. Musicians played harps, lyres, drums, and wind instruments during ceremonies, creating soundscapes that were believed to please the gods and facilitate communication between heaven and earth. Dancers performed sacred choreography that told the stories of the gods and reenacted the cosmic events that shaped the world. The economic activities of the temples were vast and complex, involving the management of enormous estates that included farmland, pastures, workshops, and storage facilities. Temple lands were worked by tenant farmers who paid rent in the form of agricultural produce, while temple workshops produced textiles, pottery, metalwork, and other goods that were traded throughout the region. The temples served as banks, lending seed grain to farmers and silver to merchants, and as insurance companies, providing aid to families struck by disaster or misfortune. The educational functions of the temples were equally important to Sumerian society. The temple schools, where young scribes learned to read and write cuneiform, were the primary centers of learning in the ancient world. Here, students not only mastered the technical skills of literacy and numeracy, but also absorbed the cultural and religious knowledge that defined their civilization. They memorized the great myths and epics, learned the proper procedures for religious ceremonies, and studied the mathematical and astronomical knowledge that was essential for managing the complex calendar of religious festivals. The religious calendar that governed Sumerian life was intimately connected to the cycles of nature and agriculture. The most important festivals coincided with the key moments in the farming year: the spring planting, the summer solstice, the autumn harvest, and the winter rest. Each of these celebrations brought the entire community together in acts of worship, thanksgiving, and social bonding that reinforced both religious faith and civic unity. The New Year festival, celebrated at the time of the spring floods, was the most elaborate and significant of all Sumerian religious observances. This celebration, which lasted for several days, included processions through the city streets, dramatic reenactments of the creation myths, ritual purification ceremonies, and the symbolic marriage of the king or high priest to a priestess representing the goddess Inanna. These ceremonies were believed to renew the fertility of the land and ensure the prosperity of the community for the coming year. The sacred marriage ritual was one of the most profound and mysterious aspects of Sumerian religion. This ceremony, performed annually in many cities, involved the symbolic union of male and female principles of divinity, represented by human officials who temporarily embodied the gods themselves. The ritual was understood to maintain the cosmic balance between opposing forces and to channel divine energy into the earthly realm where it could benefit human communities. The temple workshops of Sumer were centers of artistic and technological innovation, where craftsmen created objects of extraordinary beauty and sophistication for use in religious ceremonies. Goldsmiths fashioned elaborate jewelry and ceremonial vessels decorated with precious stones and intricate patterns. Sculptors carved statues of gods and worshippers from stone, wood, and precious metals, creating works of art that expressed both religious devotion and aesthetic achievement. Textile workers wove fabrics of incredible complexity and beauty, using techniques that produced cloth fit for the gods themselves. The role of women in Sumerian religion was particularly notable for its prominence and respect. Unlike many later civilizations, Sumer recognized both male and female deities as equally important and powerful. Women could serve as priestesses at the highest levels of temple hierarchy, and some of the most important religious ceremonies were conducted exclusively by women. The goddess Inanna was one of the most widely worshipped deities in the Sumerian pantheon, and her priestesses wielded considerable influence in both religious and secular affairs. The most famous of these religious women was Enheduanna, daughter of King Sargon of Akkad, who served as high priestess of Nanna at Ur around 2,300 years before our era. Enheduanna was not only a religious leader, but also a gifted poet who composed hymns and prayers that are among the earliest known works of literature by a named author. Her compositions, preserved on cuneiform tablets, reveal a deeply personal relationship with the divine and demonstrate the sophisticated theological thinking that characterized Sumerian religion. The temple archives preserved vast collections of religious literature that provided guidance for conducting ceremonies, explained the nature of the gods, and offered moral instruction for believers. These texts included creation myths that described how the gods shaped the world from primordial chaos, flood stories that told of divine judgment and salvation, and wisdom literature that provided practical advice for living in harmony with divine will. The most famous of these religious texts was the Epic of Gilgamesh, which began as a collection of Sumerian poems about the legendary king of Uruk. This epic, which would eventually become one of the greatest works of world literature, explored profound questions about the nature of friendship, the inevitability of death, and the search for meaning in human existence. Though it was a secular story in many ways, it was deeply rooted in Sumerian religious thought and was preserved in temple libraries as a work of moral and spiritual instruction. The daily rituals performed in Sumerian temples were elaborate affairs that required precise timing and careful attention to detail. Each morning, priests would awaken the god by gently singing hymns and offering prayers, then provide the deity with a breakfast of bread, beer, meat, and fruits, presented on golden dishes and served with all the ceremony appropriate to feeding a divine guest. The god's clothing would be changed, usually consisting of elaborate garments woven from the finest materials and decorated with precious metals and jewels. Throughout the day, additional meals would be served to the god, accompanied by music, incense, and prayers. In the evening, the deity would be prepared for sleep with gentle songs and the presentation of special evening offerings. These daily rituals were understood not as mere formalities but as essential services that maintained the relationship between the human and divine communities and ensured the continued protection and favor of the gods. The architecture of Sumerian temples reflected sophisticated understanding of both practical and symbolic requirements. The buildings were oriented according to astronomical alignments that connected them to the movements of celestial bodies associated with particular deities. The use of specific numbers in the dimensions of rooms and doorways reflected mathematical relationships that were believed to embody cosmic harmonies. The decoration of walls and columns with intricate mosaics and sculptures created environments that transported worshippers from the ordinary world into the sacred realm of the gods. The influence of Sumerian religion extended far beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia, spreading through trade and conquest to influence the religious development of neighboring civilizations. The basic structure of Sumerian theology, With its hierarchy of gods governing different aspects of existence, its elaborate temple complexes serving multiple community functions, and its integration of religious observance with civic life became the model for religious organization throughout the ancient Middle East. The great excavations conducted at Ur by Sir Leonard Woolley in the 1920s revealed the extraordinary wealth and sophistication of Sumerian religious culture. The royal cemetery at Ur, with its elaborate burial goods and evidence of human sacrifice, demonstrated the central role that religious beliefs played in Sumerian concepts of death and afterlife. The beautiful objects recovered from these excavations, now displayed in museums around the world, testify to the skill of Sumerian craftsmen and the importance of religious art in their society. As you settle into peaceful rest, imagine the gentle sounds of evening prayers rising from a Sumerian temple 4,000 years ago. The soft voices of priests and priestesses, trained from childhood in the sacred songs, blend in harmonious melodies that seem to connect earth with heaven. The flickering light of oil lamps illuminates walls decorated with scenes of gods and goddesses, while the sweet scent of incense carries the prayers of the faithful toward the divine realm. In this sacred space, surrounded by the accumulated wisdom and devotion of countless generations, the Sumerian people found meaning, purpose, and community. Their temples were not just buildings, but living symbols of their deepest beliefs about the nature of existence and humanity's place in the cosmic order. Through their religious practices, they created bonds that united their communities and connected them to forces greater than themselves. From these temples, guided by divine inspiration and human wisdom, would emerge the world's first written legal codes, establishing principles of justice and order that would govern human societies for millennia to come. In the hushed halls of the temple archives at Nippur, around 4,100 years ago, a scribe carefully pressed his reed stylus into a fresh clay tablet, creating wedge-shaped marks that would preserve for all time one of humanity's most revolutionary achievements. The document he was inscribing was not a record of grain shipments or temple offerings, but something far more profound. A comprehensive code of laws that would establish principles of justice, fairness, and social order that continue to influence legal systems today. This was the Code of Ur-Nammu, named after the great king of Ur who commissioned it around 2,100 years before our era. Though fragments of earlier legal texts have been discovered, Ur-Nammu's code represents the oldest complete legal document yet found by archaeologists, predating the more famous Code of Hammurabi by over 300 years. This remarkable achievement demonstrates that the Sumerians were not only the first to develop cities, writing, and organized religion, but also the first to create formal systems of law that could ensure justice and maintain social harmony. The development of written law codes was a natural progression from the increasingly complex societies that emerged in Sumerian cities. As communities grew larger and more diverse, the informal systems of justice that had served smaller groups became inadequate. Disputes between strangers could not be resolved through family mediation. Commercial transactions between people from different cities required standardized rules and procedures. The administration of large urban populations demanded consistent application of penalties and punishments. Imagine yourself as a witness to one of the first formal legal proceedings in human history, taking place in the courtyard of a Sumerian temple around 4,000 years ago. The morning sun filters through date palm fronds as elders and priests take their places on reed mats arranged in a semicircle. Before them stand two merchants, one claiming that the other has failed to deliver promised goods, the other insisting that payment was never received as agreed. In earlier times, such a dispute might have been settled through violence or family feuding, but now there is a better way. The presiding judge, a respected priest trained in legal procedure, calls for the presentation of evidence. Clay tablets recording the original transaction are brought forward and read aloud. Witnesses testify under oath, their words recorded by scribes for future reference. The judge consults written precedents, comparing this case to similar disputes that have been resolved in the past. After careful deliberation, he renders a decision based not on personal preference or social favoritism, but on established legal principles that apply equally to all members of the community. The Code of Ur-Nammu addressed many of the issues that arose in increasingly complex urban societies. It established standardized penalties for crimes such as theft, assault, and murder, replacing the arbitrary justice of earlier times with predictable consequences that everyone could understand. It regulated marriage and divorce, protecting the rights of both husbands and wives while establishing clear procedures for resolving domestic disputes. It governed commercial transactions, ensuring that contracts would be honored and that merchants could conduct business with confidence. One of the most remarkable aspects of Ur-Nammu's code was its emphasis on monetary compensation rather than physical punishment for many offenses. While earlier forms of justice often relied on the principle of retaliation, literally an eye for an eye, the Sumerian legal system recognized that financial penalties could often provide more appropriate and practical solutions to legal disputes. A person who accidentally injured another might pay silver to compensate for medical treatment and lost wages rather than suffering identical injury themselves. The code also demonstrated sophisticated understanding of different degrees of responsibility and intent. It distinguished between accidental and deliberate harm, between theft by stealth and robbery by force, between first-time offenses and repeated violations of law. These distinctions, which seem obvious to us today, represented revolutionary thinking in a world where justice had previously been administered through immediate reaction rather than careful consideration. The tablets containing the Code of Ur-Nammu were discovered at Nippur by American archaeologists in the early 20th century, though the significance of their find was not immediately recognized. The cuneiform text was fragmentary and difficult to read, requiring decades of careful study by specialists in ancient languages before its true importance became clear. Today, these precious tablets are housed in the University of Pennsylvania Museum, where they continue to provide insights into the earliest development of human legal thinking. The legal procedures established by the Sumerians were remarkably sophisticated, involving multiple safeguards to ensure fair treatment for all parties. Witnesses were required to swear oaths before testifying, with severe penalties for perjury. Documentary evidence was carefully preserved and authenticated. Multiple judges might hear important cases, reducing the risk of individual bias or corruption. Appeals procedures allowed dissatisfied parties to seek review of decisions by higher authorities. The training of judges and legal officials was a rigorous process that required mastery of both written law and oral tradition. Young men destined for legal careers spent years in temple schools learning to read and write cuneiform, memorizing legal precedents, and studying the principles of justice and equity that governed their society. They practiced by observing experienced judges and participating in mock trials that prepared them for the complex situations they would face in actual legal proceedings. Women in Sumerian society enjoyed legal rights that were remarkable for their time and would not be matched in many later civilizations. They could own property, conduct business, and even serve as witnesses in legal proceedings. Divorce laws protected women from arbitrary abandonment while also recognizing that marriages could sometimes fail beyond repair. Inheritance laws ensured that daughters as well as sons could receive portions of family wealth, though typically in smaller amounts reflecting the social expectations of their time. The enforcement of legal decisions required the development of new institutions and procedures. Court officers were appointed to ensure that judgments were carried out, that fines were paid, and that property was transferred as ordered. Prisons, among the first in human history, housed individuals who could not or would not pay their fines or who posed ongoing threats to community safety. Public records of legal proceedings were maintained, creating archives that could be consulted in future cases involving similar issues. The influence of Sumerian legal innovations extended far beyond their own cities and time period. The basic principles they established, including written law codes, standardized procedures, documentary evidence, and graduated punishments, became fundamental features of legal systems throughout the ancient world. The Code of Hammurabi, created several centuries later in Babylon, clearly built upon Sumerian precedents while expanding and refining their approach to legal problems. The economic aspects of Sumerian law were particularly well developed, reflecting the commercial sophistication of their urban society. Contract law governed agreements between merchants, craftsmen, and farmers, establishing clear rules for the exchange of goods and services. Banking regulations controlled the lending of silver and grain, protecting both creditors and debtors from exploitation. Labor laws established standards for wages and working conditions, ensuring that workers received fair compensation for their efforts. Property law in Sumerian society was complex and nuanced, recognizing different types of ownership and use rights. Temple lands were held communally and administered by religious officials for the benefit of the entire community. Private property could be bought, sold, and inherited according to established procedures that protected legitimate ownership while preventing fraud. Public works such as irrigation canals and city walls were maintained through community obligation, with legal penalties for those who failed to contribute their fair share of labor or materials. Family law addressed the intimate relationships that bound Sumerian society together. Marriage contracts specified the obligations of husbands and wives, the management of household property, and the care of children. Adoption procedures allowed childless couples to acquire heirs while providing security for orphaned children. Inheritance laws ensured the orderly transfer of wealth from one generation to the next, preventing the family conflicts that could tear communities apart. Criminal law distinguished between different categories of wrongdoing and prescribed appropriate punishments for each. Crimes against persons, such as assault and murder, were treated most severely, often requiring payment of substantial compensation to victims or their families. Property crimes, such as theft and fraud, resulted in financial penalties typically much greater than the value of the stolen goods. Crimes against the community, such as neglecting irrigation duties or avoiding military service, were punished through public service or temporary loss of civic privileges. The religious dimensions of Sumerian law reflected the integration of sacred and secular authority in their society. Many legal proceedings took place in temple courtyards under the auspices of priestly judges who were believed to represent divine justice on earth. Oaths were sworn before the gods, who were thought to punish perjurers even if human authorities failed to detect their lies. Legal documents often included prayers asking for divine blessing on just agreements and divine punishment for those who violated their commitments. The preservation and transmission of legal knowledge was accomplished through the same scribal schools that maintained other aspects of Sumerian culture. Students learning to become lawyers or judges copied legal texts, studied famous cases, and memorized the principles that governed their legal system. This educational process ensured that legal knowledge would be passed accurately from one generation to the next, and that standards of justice would remain consistent over time. International law, though not called by that name, emerged from the need to regulate relationships between different Sumerian cities and with foreign peoples. Treaties established the boundaries between territories, governed trade relationships, and provided mechanisms for resolving disputes between communities. Diplomatic immunity protected ambassadors and merchants traveling between cities. Extradition agreements ensured that criminals could not escape justice by fleeing to neighboring territories. The archaeological evidence for Sumerian legal systems comes from thousands of tablets discovered at sites throughout Mesopotamia. Court records, legal contracts, and administrative documents provide detailed insights into how their legal system actually functioned in daily life. These texts reveal a society that took justice seriously and that developed sophisticated mechanisms for ensuring fair treatment under law. The Code of Lipit Ishtar, created by another Sumerian king around 1900 years before our era, expanded upon the principles established by Ur-Nammu while addressing new issues that had emerged as society continued to evolve. This code included provisions for regulating the rental of houses and fields, standardizing weights and measures used in commerce, and protecting the rights of adopted children. The prologue to this code explicitly states that it was created to establish justice and eliminate oppression, demonstrating the moral purposes that motivated Sumerian legal development. Legal education in Sumerian society extended beyond professional training to include basic instruction for all citizens. People needed to understand their rights and obligations under law, the procedures for seeking justice when wronged, and the consequences of violating legal standards. This general legal literacy was essential for maintaining social order and ensuring that the benefits of formal justice were available to all members of the community. The legacy of Sumerian legal innovation cannot be overstated. Every modern legal system, from the smallest local court to the highest international tribunal, operates according to principles first established by Sumerian lawmakers over 4,000 years ago. The presumption of innocence, the right to present evidence, the requirement for witnesses, the standardization of punishments, and countless other features of contemporary justice all trace their origins to the clay tablets inscribed in ancient Mesopotamian cities. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, imagine the quiet satisfaction of a Sumerian judge who has spent his day resolving disputes fairly and according to law. The oil lamps in his study burn low as he reviews the cases he has decided, ensuring that justice has been served and that his community has been made more harmonious through the application of legal wisdom. Outside his window, the city sleeps peacefully, its citizens secure in the knowledge that they live under the protection of laws that treat all people with fairness and respect. This vision of justice under law, first realized in ancient Sumer, represents one of humanity's greatest achievements. It transformed societies from collections of individuals competing for advantage into communities bound together by shared commitment to fairness and mutual respect. The legal principles they established continue to guide human civilization in its endless quest for justice and social harmony. From these ancient courtrooms and legal precedents would emerge humanity's greatest literary achievement, the Epic of Gilgamesh, a story that would explore the deepest questions of law, loyalty, friendship, and the search for meaning in human existence. In the flickering light of an oil lamp in ancient Uruk, around 4,000 years ago, a master storyteller sits before a gathering of students, priests, and nobles. His voice carries the weight of centuries as he begins to recite the opening lines of humanity's oldest known literary masterpiece. He who saw everything to the edge of the world, he who experienced all things, Gilgamesh, who knew the countries of the world. He was wise, he saw mysteries, and knew secret things. These words, first spoken in the Sumerian language and later preserved in cuneiform script on clay tablets, mark the beginning of our journey into the rich literary heritage that emerged from the world's first civilization. The Epic of Gilgamesh represents far more than an ancient story. It is humanity's first great exploration of the universal themes that continue to define literature today. The search for meaning in life, the power of friendship, the inevitability of death, and the quest for immortality. Born from earlier Sumerian poems about the legendary king of Uruk, this epic would grow and evolve over more than a millennium, eventually becoming one of the most influential works in world literature. The historical Gilgamesh ruled Uruk sometime around 2,700 years before our era, during what scholars call the early dynastic period of Mesopotamian history. Archaeological evidence suggests he was indeed a real king who strengthened Uruk's walls and led military campaigns that expanded his city's influence throughout the region. But it was not his historical deeds that made Gilgamesh immortal. It was the power of the stories that grew up around his name, stories that transformed a mortal king into a figure of mythic proportions. The earliest Sumerian poems about Gilgamesh were probably composed during his lifetime or shortly after his death, passed down through oral tradition by professional storytellers who performed at religious festivals and royal courts. These poems celebrated his great deeds, his friendship with the wild man Enkidu, his journey to the cedar forest to battle the monster Humbaba, his rejection of the goddess Ishtar's advances, and his desperate quest for the secret of eternal life after Enkidu's tragic death. As these stories were told and retold across generations, they began to coalesce into a unified narrative that explored profound questions about the human condition. The Sumerian poems were eventually written down in cuneiform script, preserving them for posterity and allowing later scribes to combine, edit, and expand them into the comprehensive epic that we know today. The most complete version, written in the Akkadian language around 3,800 years ago, was discovered in the library of the Assyrian king Ashurbanipal at Nineveh in the 19th century. The story of Gilgamesh begins with the introduction of its hero as a king of extraordinary power and accomplishment, but also of disturbing arrogance and excess. The people of Uruk, though proud of their mighty ruler, complain to the gods about his oppressive behavior. In response, the gods create Enkidu, a wild man who lives among the animals in the wilderness, to serve as Gilgamesh's equal and challenger. This opening establishes one of the epic's central themes, the civilizing power of friendship and the importance of balance in human relationships. The transformation of Enkidu from wild beast to civilized human being represents one of literature's most powerful explorations of what separates humanity from the natural world. When Enkidu is seduced by a temple priestess and brought to the city, he loses his connection to the animals, but gains something more precious: consciousness, wisdom, and the capacity for deep friendship. His journey from nature to civilization mirrors the broader human journey from primitive existence to complex society. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu, which begins in combat and grows into the deepest bond imaginable, provides the emotional heart of the epic. Together, these two heroes undertake great adventures that test their courage, wisdom, and loyalty. They journey to the cedar forest, a realm of mystery and danger guarded by the terrible monster Humbaba, where they must overcome both external threats and their own fears and doubts. The Cedar Forest episode, one of the most vivid and exciting portions of the epic, can be read on multiple levels. On the surface, it is a thrilling adventure story about two heroes battling a fearsome monster. On a deeper level, it explores themes of environmental destruction, as Gilgamesh and Enkidu cut down the sacred cedar trees despite warnings about the consequences of their actions. On the deepest level, it examines the moral complexities of heroic action and the sometimes terrible price of achieving greatness. The rejection of Ishtar's marriage proposal represents another crucial moment in the epic's development. When the goddess of love offers to make Gilgamesh her consort, he refuses, recounting the tragic fates that befell her previous lovers. This episode explores themes of power, sexuality, and the relationship between mortals and gods. Ishtar's furious response, sending the Bull of Heaven to punish Gilgamesh and Enkidu, sets in motion the events that will lead to the epic's tragic climax. The death of Enkidu, decreed by the gods as punishment for the hero's defiance, transforms the epic from an adventure story into a profound meditation on mortality and loss. Gilgamesh's grief at his friend's death is described with psychological insight that remains moving even today. His refusal to accept Enkidu's death, his desperate attempts to bring his friend back to life, and his eventual recognition that death is the common fate of all humanity provide some of literature's most powerful explorations of how people cope with loss. Driven by grief and terror at his own mortality, Gilgamesh embarks on a quest to find Utnapishtim, the survivor of the Great Flood who was granted immortality by the gods. This journey takes him to the edge of the world through darkness and danger in a desperate attempt to escape the human condition. The flood story that Utnapishtim tells, remarkably similar to the biblical account of Noah's Ark, demonstrates the interconnected nature of ancient Middle Eastern literature and mythology. The ultimate failure of Gilgamesh's quest for immortality provides the epic's final and most profound lesson. When Utnapishtim gives him a plant that can restore youth, Gilgamesh loses it to a serpent while bathing in a spring. This symbolic episode suggests that immortality, even when briefly grasped, cannot be permanently possessed by mortals. The epic concludes with Gilgamesh's return to Uruk, where he finds consolation not in eternal life, but in the enduring achievements of civilization itself. The literary techniques employed in the Epic of Gilgamesh were remarkably sophisticated for such an early work. The use of parallel episodes, repetitive phrases, and symbolic imagery created a rich, layered narrative that could be appreciated on multiple levels. The epic's structure, moving from comedy through adventure to tragedy and finally to hard-won wisdom, established patterns that would influence storytelling for millennia to come. The poetic language of the epic, even in translation, retains much of its original power and beauty. Phrases like, "the friend, the companion, he who rejoiced my heart," and "remember me, O Enkidu, forget not all that we have done together," demonstrate the emotional depth and literary sophistication that characterized Sumerian poetry. The epic's use of dreams, omens, and supernatural events created a sense of connection between the human and divine worlds that gave the story cosmic significance. The tablets containing various versions of the Gilgamesh epic have been discovered at archaeological sites throughout Mesopotamia and beyond, demonstrating the widespread popularity and influence of this ancient masterpiece. Fragments have been found at Megiddo in Palestine, Emar in Syria, and Hattusa in Turkey, showing that the story was known and copied far beyond its Sumerian origins. The diversity of these discoveries suggests that the epic was not just elite literature but was appreciated by people throughout the ancient Middle East. The preservation of the Gilgamesh epic required the dedicated efforts of generations of scribes who copied and recopied the tablets, ensuring that this literary treasure would survive the collapse of the civilizations that created it. The scribal schools attached to temples and palaces throughout Mesopotamia included the epic in their curricula, teaching students not just the technical skills of reading and writing, but also the cultural values and artistic achievements of their civilization. The influence of the Gilgamesh epic on later literature cannot be overstated. Its themes, characters, and narrative structures can be traced through the epic traditions of Greece, Rome, and other ancient civilizations. The friendship between Gilgamesh and Enkidu provided a model for later literary partnerships, from Achilles and Patroclus in Homer's Iliad to countless other heroic friendships in world literature. The epic's exploration of mortality and the search for meaning continues to resonate in contemporary works of fiction, poetry, and drama. The rediscovery of the Gilgamesh epic in the 19th century was one of archaeology's greatest gifts to world literature. When British Museum curator George Smith first deciphered and translated portions of the epic in 1872, he was so excited that he reportedly ran around his office removing his clothes. His discovery revealed to the modern world a literary masterpiece that had been lost for over 2,000 years, adding immeasurably to our understanding of ancient culture and the development of human storytelling. The epic's treatment of environmental themes has gained particular relevance in contemporary times. The destruction of the cedar forest, the pollution of sacred waters, and the disruption of natural balances serve as early warnings about the consequences of human environmental abuse. Modern readers often find in Gilgamesh's story a cautionary tale about the relationship between civilization and nature that speaks directly to current ecological concerns. The psychological insights contained in the epic remain remarkably modern and relevant. Gilgamesh's character development, from arrogant tyrant to wise king, provides one of literature's first examples of genuine character growth through suffering and experience. His grief process, moving through denial, anger, bargaining, and eventually acceptance, anticipates modern understanding of how people cope with loss and trauma. The epic's exploration of leadership and power offers timeless lessons about the responsibilities of rulers and the dangers of unchecked authority. Gilgamesh's initial oppression of his people, his growth through friendship and adventure, and his eventual wisdom demonstrate that true leadership requires not just strength but also compassion, humility, and understanding of human limitations. The religious and philosophical content of the epic provides insight into Sumerian beliefs about the nature of existence, the relationship between humans and gods, and the meaning of life and death. While the gods in the epic are powerful, they are also flawed, jealous, and sometimes arbitrary, reflecting a sophisticated understanding of divine nature that avoids both naive anthropomorphism and abstract theology. The educational value of the Gilgamesh epic in ancient times extended beyond entertainment to include moral instruction, cultural transmission, and the development of critical thinking skills. Students who studied the epic learned not just about their literary heritage, but also about the values, beliefs, and achievements of their civilization. The epic served as a repository of wisdom that could guide individuals in their own struggles with life's fundamental challenges. The manuscript tradition of the Gilgamesh epic, preserved on hundreds of cuneiform tablets now housed in museums around the world, represents one of humanity's most important cultural achievements. The British Museum, the University of Pennsylvania Museum, the Louvre, and other institutions serve as guardians of these precious documents, ensuring that future generations will be able to study and appreciate this ancient masterpiece. As you settle into peaceful rest, imagine yourself listening to the voice of an ancient storyteller in the courtyard of a Sumerian temple, the stars wheeling overhead as the eternal tale unfolds. The words that carried such power 4,000 years ago still speak to the human heart today, reminding us that despite all the changes wrought by time and progress, the fundamental experiences of friendship, loss, growth, and the search for meaning remained constant across the centuries. In the gentle rhythm of ancient poetry, in the timeless wisdom of humanity's first great literary achievement, we find not just entertainment but profound insights into what it means to be human. The Epic of Gilgamesh stands as testimony to the power of storytelling to preserve truth, transmit wisdom, and connect us across the vast distances of time and culture. From this literary foundation, the Sumerians would extend their cultural influence through networks of trade and diplomacy that connected their cities to the wider world, spreading their innovations and learning from distant peoples in humanity's first great age of international exchange. Picture a caravan of merchant donkeys slowly making their way across the ancient landscape of Mesopotamia 4,000 years ago, their wooden panniers loaded with precious goods from distant lands. The lead trader, a weathered Sumerian merchant named Ea-Nasir, guides his animals along well-worn paths that connect the great cities of the world's first civilization. In his cargo rest copper ingots from the mountains of Anatolia, lapis lazuli from the distant peaks of Afghanistan, timber from the cedar forests of Lebanon, and delicate shell ornaments from the shores of the Persian Gulf. This scene, repeated countless times across millennia, represents one of humanity's most important innovations: long-distance trade that connected distant peoples and spread the benefits of civilization across vast regions. The Sumerians were not content to remain isolated within their city walls, no matter how magnificent those cities might be. From the earliest days of their civilization, they looked outward, establishing trading relationships that eventually stretched from the Indus Valley in the east to the Mediterranean coast in the west, from the highland regions of Iran and Anatolia in the north to the Arabian Peninsula in the south. This vast network of commercial connections made Sumer the center of the ancient world's economy and brought unprecedented wealth and diversity to their urban centers. The motivation for this extensive trade was both practical and visionary. The fertile plains of Mesopotamia could produce abundant crops and support large populations, but they lacked many resources that were essential for advanced civilization. There were no significant deposits of metals like copper, tin, or gold. The region had no forests to provide quality timber for construction. Precious stones, exotic materials, and luxury goods were simply unavailable locally. To obtain these necessities and luxuries, the Sumerians had to reach out to distant lands, creating the world's first international economy. The archaeological evidence for Sumerian trade is remarkably extensive and well preserved, found in excavations throughout the Middle East and beyond. Cylinder seals bearing Sumerian inscriptions have been discovered in the Indus Valley cities of Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro, indicating direct contact between these two great ancient civilizations. Sumerian pottery and artifacts have been found in sites throughout Iran, Anatolia, and the Levant. Perhaps most remarkably, cuneiform tablets recording commercial transactions have been discovered as far away as Kanesh in central Turkey, where Sumerian merchants established permanent trading colonies. The organization of Sumerian trade was sophisticated and complex, involving multiple levels of merchants, financiers, and intermediaries. At the local level, small traders operated within individual cities or between nearby settlements, carrying goods like pottery, textiles, and foodstuffs that were produced in surplus by local craftsmen and farmers. At the regional level, more substantial merchants organized caravans that traveled between major Sumerian cities, facilitating the exchange of specialized products and maintaining the economic integration of the civilization. The most ambitious and profitable operations were the long-distance expeditions that ventured far beyond Mesopotamia to acquire exotic goods and raw materials. These expeditions required substantial capital investment, careful planning, and considerable courage. Merchants had to navigate unfamiliar territories, negotiate with foreign peoples, and face the constant dangers of bandits, harsh weather, and political instability. The potential rewards, however, were enormous, as exotic goods could be sold for many times their original cost. The financing of these trading ventures was accomplished through sophisticated banking and credit systems that may have been the world's first examples of commercial finance. Temple institutions, with their substantial accumulated wealth, often served as banks, lending silver or goods to merchants who would repay the loans with interest after successful trading expeditions. Private investors might pool their resources to finance particularly ambitious ventures, sharing both the risks and the potential profits. The goods that flowed through Sumerian trade networks represented the finest products available in the ancient world. Copper came primarily from the rich mines of Anatolia and Cyprus, transported overland by donkey caravan or by ship across the Mediterranean and then up the Euphrates River. Tin, essential for creating bronze alloys, was obtained from sources that may have included regions as distant as Afghanistan or even Britain, though the exact origins remain mysterious to archaeologists. Gold arrived from various sources, including Anatolia, Egypt, and possibly Nubia, transformed by Sumerian craftsmen into jewelry, ceremonial objects, and decorative elements for temples and palaces. Silver, used both as a medium of exchange and for luxury goods, came from mines in Anatolia and Iran. These precious metals not only served practical purposes, but also became symbols of wealth and status that reinforced social hierarchies and political power. The trade in luxury goods revealed the sophisticated tastes and technical skills of Sumerian society. Lapis lazuli, that beautiful blue stone prized throughout the ancient world, made the long journey from mines in Afghanistan to Sumerian workshops where it was carved into seals, jewelry, and decorative inlays. Carnelian and other semi-precious stones arrived from various sources to be fashioned into beads and ornaments. Ivory from elephants and exotic woods from distant forests were transformed into furniture, musical instruments, and artistic objects. The textile trade was particularly important to the Sumerian economy, as their skilled weavers produced fabrics that were renowned throughout the ancient world. Sumerian woolens, made from the fleeces of their carefully bred sheep and dyed with expensive imported pigments, were traded as luxury goods from the Indus Valley to Egypt. The techniques developed by Sumerian textile workers, including complex weaving patterns and sophisticated dyeing processes, would influence fabric production for millennia. The economic impact of this extensive trade was transformative for Sumerian society. The wealth generated by commercial activities funded the construction of magnificent temples, palaces, and public works projects. It supported specialized craftsmen who could devote their entire lives to perfecting their skills rather than producing goods for mere survival. It enabled the development of educational institutions, artistic traditions, and technological innovations that would not have been possible in a purely agricultural economy. The social effects of trade were equally significant. Merchants became a new class of wealthy and influential citizens who could challenge the traditional dominance of priests and nobles. Their travels exposed them to different cultures, technologies, and ideas that they brought back to enrich Sumerian civilization. The cosmopolitan atmosphere that developed in major trading centers like and Uruk created environments where innovation and creativity could flourish. The diplomatic aspects of Sumerian trade were as important as the economic dimensions. Successful long-distance commerce required peaceful relationships with the many peoples and kingdoms that controlled trade routes and resource sources. Sumerian kings developed the world's first diplomatic protocols, sending ambassadors to foreign courts, negotiating trade agreements, and establishing the legal frameworks that made international commerce possible. These diplomatic relationships often involved the exchange of gifts between rulers, a practice that served both ceremonial and practical purposes. When the king of sent precious objects to the ruler of a distant land, he was not only showing respect and friendship, but also demonstrating the wealth and power of his city while opening channels for future commercial relationships. The gifts received in return often included exotic goods, valuable raw materials, or promises of favorable treatment for Sumerian merchants. The development of standardized weights and measures was crucial for facilitating trade across different cultures and regions. Sumerian merchants could not conduct business effectively if they had to negotiate different measurement systems in every market they visited. The solution was to establish standard units that could be recognized and accepted throughout the trading network. Sumerian measurement standards based on carefully crafted stone and bronze weights spread throughout the ancient Middle East and became the foundation for commercial measurement systems that lasted for centuries. The technology of transportation played a vital role in enabling Sumerian trade. On land, donkey caravans were the primary means of moving goods across long distances. These hardy animals could carry substantial loads over difficult terrain while requiring relatively little food and water. The development of improved pack saddles, navigation techniques, and caravan organization made overland trade more efficient and profitable. Water transportation was equally important, as rivers and coastal routes often provided faster and more economical means of moving bulk goods. Sumerian boat builders developed increasingly sophisticated vessels, from simple reed boats suitable for river travel to larger wooden ships capable of maritime voyages. The techniques they developed for river navigation, including the use of sails, steering oars, and loading systems, would influence shipbuilding throughout the ancient world. The establishment of trading colonies represented one of the most ambitious aspects of Sumerian commercial expansion. In regions where valuable resources were available, but local populations lacked the organization or technology to exploit them effectively, Sumerian merchants sometimes established permanent settlements. These colonies served as bases for resource extraction, manufacturing centers for processing raw materials, and diplomatic outposts for maintaining relationships with local peoples. The colony at Kanesh in Anatolia, established around 4,000 years ago, provides the best documented example of Sumerian overseas commercial activity. Thousands of cuneiform tablets discovered at this site reveal a thriving community of Mesopotamian merchants who maintained extensive business relationships with their homeland while integrating themselves into the local economy. These tablets document everything from routine business transactions to family correspondence, providing intimate insights into the lives of ancient international traders. The role of women in Sumerian trade was more significant than in many later civilizations. Women could own businesses, enter into contracts, and even participate directly in trading expeditions. Some of the most successful merchants mentioned in cuneiform business documents were women who managed extensive commercial operations and accumulated substantial personal wealth. This economic independence gave women considerable social influence and contributed to their relatively high status in Sumerian society. The religious dimensions of trade were deeply embedded in Sumerian commercial practices. Merchants regularly made offerings to gods who were believed to protect travelers and ensure successful ventures. Temples served not only as religious centers but also as banks, warehouses, and commercial meeting places where business could be conducted under divine protection. The integration of religious and commercial activities reinforced social cohesion while providing practical benefits for traders. The legal frameworks that governed Sumerian trade were remarkably sophisticated, addressing issues that remain important in international commerce today. Contracts specified the terms of business relationships, the quality and quantity of goods to be exchanged, and the procedures for resolving disputes. Laws protected merchants from fraud and theft while also regulating their conduct to prevent exploitation of customers or trading partners. The insurance systems developed to protect traders from the risks of long-distance commerce may have been among the first in human history. Merchants could purchase protection against specific risks, such as loss of goods to bandits or storms, by paying premiums to investors who would compensate them if disasters occurred. These early insurance arrangements allowed traders to undertake more ambitious ventures while distributing risks among multiple parties. The impact of Sumerian trade on technological development was profound and lasting. The need to process imported raw materials led to innovations in metallurgy, including new techniques for alloying copper and tin to create bronze. The requirement for standardized products for export drove improvements in manufacturing processes and quality control. The challenges of long-distance transportation stimulated advances in engineering, navigation, and logistics. The cultural exchange that accompanied commercial relationships enriched Sumerian civilization in countless ways. Foreign artistic styles, religious concepts, technological innovations, and intellectual traditions all flowed into Mesopotamian cities along the same routes that carried physical goods. This cultural cross-fertilization contributed to the dynamism and creativity that characterized Sumerian civilization at its peak. The record-keeping requirements of extensive trade operations contributed significantly to the development of writing and mathematical systems. Merchants needed to track complex transactions, calculate profits and losses, and maintain accurate inventories of diverse goods. These practical needs drove innovations in accounting, mathematics, and information management that would benefit all aspects of Sumerian society. The decline of Sumerian trade networks was closely connected to the broader political and environmental changes that eventually led to the transformation of their civilization. As new powers rose in different regions, traditional trade routes became disrupted. Climate changes may have affected agricultural productivity and population levels. The rise of competing commercial centers gradually reduced Sumer's dominance of international trade. However, the legacy of Sumerian commercial innovations continued to influence economic development throughout the ancient world and beyond. The principles they established for international trade, including standardized measurements, legal contracts, diplomatic protocols, and financial instruments, became the foundation for all subsequent commercial systems. The trade networks they created continued to operate under different management, connecting distant peoples and facilitating cultural exchange for millennia. As you settle into peaceful rest, imagine the gentle sounds of a Sumerian marketplace at twilight 4,000 years ago. The calls of merchants announcing their wares fade as the day ends, replaced by the soft conversations of traders sharing stories of distant lands and exotic peoples. The exotic scents of spices, incense, and foreign textiles linger in the evening air, while the glint of precious metals and gems catches the last light of oil lamps being extinguished one by one. This cosmopolitan world of international commerce, where peoples of different cultures met in peaceful exchange for mutual benefit, represents one of humanity's greatest achievements. The Sumerians proved that cooperation and trade could accomplish more than conflict and isolation, creating prosperity and cultural enrichment that benefited all participants in their extensive commercial networks. Their example continues to inspire economic cooperation and international understanding in our interconnected modern world. From these networks of trade and diplomacy would emerge the world's first great empires, as ambitious rulers sought to unite the wealth and power of multiple cities under single leadership, beginning with the legendary kings whose reigns would define the golden age of Mesopotamian civilization. In the royal palace of Uruk, around 4,700 years ago, a young king sits upon a throne carved from precious cedar wood, his shoulders draped with a cloak woven from the finest wool and decorated with gold thread. Before him lie clay tablets bearing reports from throughout his realm, tribute from distant cities, diplomatic messages from neighboring rulers, and accounts of his army's victories in foreign lands. This is Gilgamesh, no longer just the legendary hero of epic poetry, but a historical figure whose reign marked the beginning of a new age in human civilization, the Age of Empires. The transformation of Sumerian city-states from independent urban centers into components of larger political entities represents one of the most significant developments in human history. For over 1,000 years, cities like Uruk, Ur, Lagash, and Nippur had functioned as sovereign states, each ruled by its own king and patron deity, each maintaining its own armies and conducting its own foreign policy. But as populations grew, resources became scarcer, and competition intensified, the stage was set for the emergence of rulers who would unite multiple cities under single authority, creating humanity's first empires. The earliest Sumerian kings about whom we have reliable historical information appear in records dating from around 4,800 years ago. These rulers, whose names and deeds were preserved in cuneiform inscriptions and later compiled into the remarkable document known as the Sumerian King List, established the patterns of royal authority that would influence political development throughout the ancient world. They were not merely military commanders or wealthy aristocrats who seized power through force, but individuals who claimed divine sanction for their rule and who established institutions that could govern complex societies across multiple generations. The Sumerian King List, one of the most important historical documents to survive from the ancient world, provides a chronological account of rulers from the earliest times down to the fall of the last Sumerian dynasty. This remarkable text, preserved on several cuneiform tablets now housed in museums including the Ashmolean Museum at Oxford, begins with the dramatic statement that, after the kingship descended from heaven, the kingship was in Eridu. In Eridu, Alulim became king. He ruled for 28,800 years. While the enormous reign lengths given for the earliest kings are clearly legendary rather than historical, the king list provides valuable insights into how the Sumerians understood their own political development. They believed that kingship was a divine institution granted by the gods to ensure order and justice on earth. They recognized that political authority had evolved over time, moving from city to city as different centers rose to prominence. Most importantly, they understood that legitimate rule required more than mere power. It demanded divine approval and popular acceptance. The historical Gilgamesh, whose legendary exploits we explored in our discussion of Sumerian literature, appears in the king list as the fifth ruler of Uruk's first dynasty, reigning for 126 years. While this reign length is certainly exaggerated, archaeological evidence suggests that Gilgamesh was indeed a real king who lived sometime around 2,700 years before our era. His historical achievements probably included strengthening Uruk's fortifications, expanding the city's influence over surrounding settlements, and establishing diplomatic relationships with distant regions. The process by which Gilgamesh and other early Sumerian kings transformed themselves from local city rulers into regional powers involved a combination of military conquest, diplomatic alliance, economic integration, and religious authority. Successful kings learned to present themselves not as foreign conquerors but as legitimate rulers chosen by the gods to bring order and prosperity to their subjects. They adopted the religious traditions of the cities they conquered, honored local deities, and maintained existing social structures while gradually integrating them into larger political systems. The reign of Eannatum of Lagash, around 4,500 years ago, provides one of the best documented examples of early Sumerian imperial expansion. The famous Stele of the Vultures, a limestone monument discovered at the site of ancient Girsu, depicts Eannatum's victories over the neighboring city of Umma and celebrates his extension of Lagash's authority over a substantial portion of southern Mesopotamia. The reliefs on this monument show the king leading his armies into battle, receiving divine blessing from the gods, and establishing his authority over conquered territories. The inscriptions on the Stele of the Vultures reveal sophisticated understanding of the ideological foundations of imperial rule. Eannatum claims that his conquests were undertaken at the command of the gods, particularly Ningirsu, the patron deity of Lagash. He presents his wars not as acts of aggression but as sacred missions to restore proper order and punish those who had violated divine law. He promises to rule his new subjects with justice and to maintain the religious traditions that ensured divine favor for his realm. The administrative challenges of governing multiple cities required innovations in government organization that would influence political development for millennia to come. Early Sumerian kings had to develop systems for collecting tribute from subject cities, maintaining communication across their territories, and ensuring that local officials remained loyal to central authority. They created the world's first imperial bureaucracies with specialized officials responsible for military affairs, religious ceremonies, economic administration, and diplomatic relations. The military innovations that made Sumerian imperial expansion possible included not only improvements in weapons and tactics, but also developments in logistics, communication, and command structure. Sumerian armies were among the first to use bronze weapons extensively, giving them significant advantages over enemies equipped with stone and copper tools. They developed sophisticated siege techniques for capturing fortified cities, including battering rams, scaling ladders, and undermining techniques that could breach the strongest walls. The famous Standard of Ur, discovered by Sir Leonard Woolley during his excavations in the 1920s, provides vivid depictions of Sumerian military organization and royal ceremony. This remarkable artifact, crafted from wood, lapis lazuli, and shell around 4,600 years ago, shows soldiers marching in formation with spears and shields, war chariots trampling enemies, and the king receiving tribute from conquered peoples. The scenes on the standard reveal an army that was disciplined, well-equipped, and capable of projecting power across considerable distances. The economic foundations of Sumerian imperial power rested on the wealth generated by controlling trade routes, agricultural surplus, and specialized production centers. Kings who could command the resources of multiple cities could undertake more ambitious projects, maintain larger armies, and offer more attractive rewards to supporters than rulers of single urban centers. The tribute system that developed under imperial rule created streams of wealth that flowed from peripheral areas to imperial capitals, funding the magnificent palaces, temples, and public works that demonstrated royal power. The religious dimensions of Sumerian kingship were complex and sophisticated, involving concepts that would influence political theory throughout the ancient world. Kings claimed to rule by divine mandate, presenting themselves as chosen representatives of the gods who were responsible for maintaining cosmic order on Earth. They served as high priests of their patron deities, conducting religious ceremonies that were believed to ensure divine favor for their realms. Their palaces were designed as earthly copies of divine residences, places where gods and mortals could interact for the benefit of all creation. The concept of divine kingship that developed in Sumer would influence political development throughout the ancient Middle East and beyond. Egyptian pharaohs, Persian kings, and rulers throughout the region would claim similar divine sanction for their authority. The ceremonies, symbols, and ideological frameworks created by Sumerian kings established patterns that would persist for thousands of years, demonstrating the enduring power of their political innovations. Ur-Nammu, founder of the third dynasty of Ur around 4,100 years ago, represents the culmination of Sumerian royal achievement. His reign marked the beginning of what historians call the Sumerian Renaissance, a period of unprecedented prosperity, cultural achievement, and political unification that would be remembered as the golden age of Mesopotamian civilization. Ur-Nammu not only conquered most of southern Mesopotamia, but also established administrative and legal systems that would serve as models for future empires. The Great Ziggurat of Ur, built during Ur-Nammu's reign, stands as perhaps the most impressive monument to Sumerian royal ambition and architectural achievement. This massive structure, rising in 3 great steps to a height of over 70 feet, required the labor of thousands of workers over many years. Its construction demonstrated the king's ability to mobilize vast resources, coordinate complex projects, and create monuments that would proclaim his glory for all time. The legal innovations of Ur-Nammu, including the world's first known law code, established principles of justice and governance that would influence legal development throughout history. His laws covered a wide range of issues, from commercial transactions to family relationships, demonstrating the comprehensive nature of royal authority in his unified state. The prologue to his law code explicitly states that he was chosen by the gods to establish justice and eliminate oppression, revealing the moral foundations that Sumerian kings claimed for their rule. The international relationships that Sumerian kings established with neighboring powers required sophisticated diplomatic skills and created the world's first examples of international law and treaty-making. Kings exchanged ambassadors, negotiated trade agreements, arranged royal marriages, and established the protocols that would govern relations between sovereign states for millennia to come. The diplomatic archives discovered at various Mesopotamian sites reveal a complex world of international politics where military power was balanced by negotiation, alliance, and mutual advantage. Sargon of Akkad, who conquered most of Mesopotamia around 4,300 years ago, represents a crucial transition in the development of imperial power. Though ethnically Semitic rather than Sumerian, Sargon built upon the political and administrative innovations developed by his Sumerian predecessors while expanding the scope of imperial authority to unprecedented levels. His empire stretched from the Persian Gulf to the Mediterranean Sea, creating the world's first multi-ethnic, multilingual imperial state. The Akkadian Empire established by Sargon demonstrated both the possibilities and the challenges of large-scale imperial government. While Sargon's armies could conquer vast territories and his administrators could govern diverse populations, maintaining control over such an extensive realm required constant attention and resources. The empire faced rebellions from subject peoples, invasions from outside enemies, and internal conflicts between different ethnic and cultural groups. The legacy of Sargon's empire would influence imperial development throughout history. His administrative innovations, including the use of Akkadian as a lingua franca for government and commerce, created systems that would be adopted by later empires throughout the Middle East. His military techniques, particularly the use of composite bows and professional soldiers, established patterns of warfare that would persist for centuries. His diplomatic practices, including the use of royal marriages to cement political alliances, became standard features of international relations. The decline and fall of the Akkadian Empire, brought about by a combination of internal rebellions, foreign invasions, and possibly climate change, led to a revival of Sumerian political power under the Third Dynasty of Ur. This Neo-Sumerian Renaissance, lasting from approximately 4,100 to 4,000 years ago, represented the final flowering of Sumerian civilization and demonstrated the enduring appeal of Sumerian political and cultural traditions. The kings of the Third Dynasty of Ur, including Ur-Nammu, Shulgi, Amarsin, and Shusin, ruled over a highly centralized state that controlled most of Mesopotamia through an elaborate bureaucracy of governors, administrators, and religious officials. Their archives, containing thousands of cuneiform tablets documenting everything from tax collections to temple offerings, provide unprecedented insights into the workings of ancient imperial government. The administrative achievements of the Ur Third Dynasty were remarkable for their scope and sophistication. The kings established standardized systems of taxation, measurement, and record-keeping that allowed them to govern their diverse territories efficiently. They created professional armies that could project power throughout their realm while maintaining internal security. They sponsored massive construction projects, including temples, palaces, and irrigation systems that demonstrated royal power while providing practical benefits for their subjects. The cultural achievements sponsored by these Neo-Sumerian kings included some of the finest examples of ancient art, literature, and architecture. The royal workshops of Ur produced objects of extraordinary beauty and technical skill, including the famous gold and lapis lazuli treasures discovered in the royal cemetery. The scribal schools attached to temples and palaces preserved and transmitted the literary heritage of Sumerian civilization while creating new works that would influence later cultures. The final collapse of Sumerian political power, brought about by invasions of Amorite peoples from the west around 4,000 years ago, marked the end of an era in human history. While Sumerian culture would continue to influence Mesopotamian civilization for centuries to come, political leadership would pass to new peoples who would build upon Sumerian foundations while creating their own imperial traditions. The archaeological evidence for Sumerian royal power is extensive and impressive, preserved in the ruins of palaces, temples, and administrative buildings throughout Mesopotamia. The royal cemetery at Ur, excavated by Sir Leonard Woolley, revealed the extraordinary wealth and ceremonial complexity of Sumerian kingship. The burial of Queen Puabi, with her elaborate headdress of gold leaves and precious stones, and the evidence for human sacrifice at royal funerals, demonstrates the almost divine status that Sumerian kings achieved in death as in life. The influence of Sumerian political innovations extended far beyond Mesopotamia, carried by trade, conquest, and cultural exchange to influence the development of kingdoms and empires throughout the ancient world. The concept of divine kingship, the administrative techniques of imperial government, the legal principles of royal authority, and the ceremonial aspects of royal power all became standard features of political development in Egypt, Anatolia, Iran, and beyond. The textual sources for Sumerian political history, preserved on thousands of cuneiform tablets, provide detailed insights into the personalities, achievements, and challenges of individual rulers. Royal inscriptions celebrate military victories, construction projects, and religious devotion, while also revealing the human side of kingship through references to family relationships, personal struggles, and individual accomplishments. As you drift toward peaceful sleep, Imagine the quiet majesty of a Sumerian royal court at twilight 4,000 years ago. In the great hall of the palace at Ur, oil lamps cast flickering shadows on walls decorated with scenes of royal triumph and divine blessing. The king sits in council with his advisors, reviewing reports from throughout his realm and making the decisions that will affect the lives of thousands of his subjects. Outside the palace walls, the great city sleeps peacefully under the protection of its royal garrison and the divine favor of its patron deities. Citizens rest secure in the knowledge that they live under the rule of a king chosen by the gods to maintain justice and order on earth. The prosperity and security they enjoy are the fruits of political innovations that transformed human society and created the foundations of civilized government. The legacy of these ancient kings lives on in the political institutions, legal principles, and governmental traditions that continue to shape human society today. Every modern state, every legal system, every diplomatic protocol can trace its origins back to the innovations of rulers who first learned to govern large, complex societies with justice, efficiency, and wisdom. From the palaces of these ancient kings, scribes and scholars would preserve the records and traditions of their civilization, creating archives that would allow later generations to rediscover and appreciate the achievements of humanity's first great urban culture. Picture a windswept mound rising from the Iraqi desert in the year 1849, its surface scattered with fragments of ancient pottery and mysterious brick foundations barely visible beneath centuries of accumulated sand. A young British diplomat named Austen Henry Layard stands at the summit of this tell, as such artificial hills are known to archaeologists, holding in his hands a small clay tablet covered with strange wedge-shaped marks that no living person can read. He cannot know that he is touching one of the first clues that will lead to the rediscovery of humanity's oldest civilization, a culture so ancient that it had been completely forgotten by the time the pyramids of Egypt were built. For over 2,000 years, the great cities of Sumer lay buried beneath the desert sands of Mesopotamia, their names unknown, their achievements forgotten, their very existence erased from human memory. The last cuneiform texts had been written in the 1st century of our era, and with the death of the final scribes who understood the ancient writing, an entire civilization vanished from the world's consciousness. The magnificent ziggurats crumbled into shapeless mounds, the royal palaces dissolved back into the clay from which they had been built, and the accumulated wisdom of humanity's first urban culture seemed lost forever. The story of how Sumerian civilization was rediscovered and brought back to light is one of the most remarkable chapters in the history of archaeology. It required the dedication of generations of scholars, the patient work of countless excavators, and the gradual development of techniques for reading ancient languages and interpreting material remains. The process began in the 19th century with explorers and diplomats who were drawn to the mysterious ruins scattered across Mesopotamia, but it would take more than a century of sustained effort before the full scope of Sumerian achievements became clear. The earliest European travelers to reach Mesopotamia were amazed by the enormous artificial mounds that dotted the landscape between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. Local inhabitants had preserved dim memories of these sites, calling them by Arabic names that sometimes preserved echoes of their ancient designations. The Great Mound at Warka was known to be the site of ancient Uruk, while the imposing ruins at Muqayyah were identified with the biblical city of Ur. But these identifications were tentative, and the true age and significance of the sites remained mysterious. The breakthrough that began the systematic investigation of Mesopotamian archaeology came with the work of Paul-Émile Botta, French consul at Mosul, who began excavating at the site of Khorsabad in 1843. Botta's discovery of magnificent Assyrian palaces, with their elaborate stone reliefs depicting royal hunts and military campaigns, demonstrated that the ancient texts describing great Mesopotamian empires were based on historical reality. His success inspired others to begin similar investigations throughout the region. The decipherment of cuneiform writing, which proceeded gradually throughout the 19th century, was essential for understanding the civilizations that archaeologists were uncovering. The key breakthrough came from the study of the trilingual inscription on the cliff face at Behistun in Iran, where the Persian king Darius I had carved the same text in Old Persian, Babylonian, and Elamite, all using cuneiform script. By comparing these three versions, scholars like Sir Henry Rawlinson were able to determine the phonetic values of many cuneiform signs and begin the process of reading ancient Mesopotamian texts. As more cuneiform tablets were discovered and translated, it became clear that the Assyrians and Babylonians, whose monuments and inscriptions were being uncovered by archaeologists, had inherited their civilization from even more ancient peoples. References appeared to mysterious early rulers with strange names, to cities whose locations were unknown, and to cultural traditions that seemed to stretch back to the very beginnings of recorded history. The search for these earliest civilizations would lead archaeologists to the deepest levels of Mesopotamian tells and to the discovery of Sumerian culture. The systematic excavation of Sumerian sites began in the late 19th century with the work of Ernest de Sarzec at Girsu, ancient Lagash. De Sarzec, French vice-consul at Basra, began excavating at the site of Tello in 1877, and over the course of 2 decades uncovered thousands of cuneiform tablets and artifacts that revealed the existence of a previously unknown civilization. His discovery of the famous Stele of the Vultures, with its depictions of early Sumerian warfare, provided dramatic evidence of sophisticated artistic and political achievement in the 3rd millennium before our era. The excavations at Girsu yielded an extraordinary collection of Sumerian artifacts, including the remarkable statues of Gudea, ruler of Lagash around 4,100 years ago. These sculptures, carved from dark stone with exquisite skill, showed a level of artistic sophistication that challenged prevailing assumptions about the development of ancient civilization. The inscriptions on these statues, written in Sumerian cuneiform, provided some of the first extensive texts in humanity's oldest known written language. The most famous and productive Sumerian excavation was conducted by Sir Leonard Woolley at Ur between 1922 and 1934. Woolley's team, working under the auspices of the British Museum and the University of Pennsylvania, uncovered vast areas of the ancient city, including the Great Ziggurat, extensive residential districts, and the spectacular royal cemetery that would capture the imagination of the world. The meticulous methods employed by Woolley's expedition set new standards for archaeological investigation and demonstrated the wealth of information that careful excavation could reveal. The royal cemetery at Ur provided some of the most dramatic evidence for the sophistication of early Sumerian civilization. The tomb of Queen Puabi, discovered intact with her elaborate golden headdress and rich grave goods, demonstrated the wealth and artistic achievement of Sumerian royalty. The evidence for human sacrifice at royal funerals, with dozens of attendants apparently willingly following their rulers into death, revealed the almost divine status that Sumerian kings achieved and the complex religious beliefs that governed their society. The recovery of the Standard of Ur from the royal cemetery provided vivid insights into Sumerian military organization and royal ceremony. This remarkable artifact, with its scenes of warfare and banqueting executed in lapis lazuli, shell and red limestone, showed that Sumerian artists were capable of sophisticated narrative composition and had access to luxury materials from across the ancient world. The standard became one of the most famous objects in the British Museum and helped establish the popular image of Sumerian civilization. The German Archaeological Institute's long-running excavations at Uruk, beginning in 1912 and continuing with interruptions into the present century, have revealed the longest continuous sequence of human occupation at any archaeological site in the world. The deep soundings at Uruk have traced the development of the city from its earliest Neolithic origins through the emergence of urban civilization and the invention of writing. The thousands of early cuneiform tablets discovered at Uruk provide the earliest evidence for human writing and record-keeping. The American excavations at Nippur, conducted by the University of Pennsylvania between 1889 and 1900, uncovered one of the largest archives of cuneiform tablets ever discovered. The temple library at Nippur contained over 30,000 tablets spanning more than 2 millennia of Mesopotamian history. These texts included literary works, religious compositions, legal documents, and school exercises that provided unprecedented insights into Sumerian culture, education, and daily life. The French excavations at Mari, though focusing primarily on a later period, revealed extensive evidence for Sumerian cultural influence throughout Mesopotamia. The palace archives at Mari, containing over 20,000 cuneiform tablets, documented diplomatic relationships, trade connections, and cultural exchanges that demonstrated the far-reaching impact of Sumerian civilization on the ancient world. The development of scientific archaeology in the 20th century brought new techniques and approaches to the study of Sumerian sites. Stratigraphic excavation, which carefully records the sequence of occupation layers, allowed archaeologists to trace the development of Sumerian civilization over time. Ceramic analysis helped establish chronological frameworks and trace cultural connections between different sites. The study of ancient environments provided insights into the agricultural and ecological foundations of Sumerian society. The application of modern scientific techniques to Sumerian archaeology has yielded remarkable insights that would have been impossible for earlier generations of excavators. Radiocarbon dating has provided precise chronologies for Sumerian developments. Chemical analysis of artifacts has revealed ancient trade connections and manufacturing techniques. Computer modeling has allowed archaeologists to reconstruct ancient landscapes and understand how environmental changes affected Sumerian civilization. The conservation and study of cuneiform tablets has been revolutionized by modern technology. High-resolution photography and digital imaging can reveal text that is invisible to the naked eye. Computer databases allow scholars to search through thousands of texts for specific words or phrases. Three-dimensional scanning can preserve perfect records of tablets while allowing them to be studied without physical handling that might cause damage. The major museums of the world now house extensive collections of Sumerian artifacts that allow millions of people to appreciate the achievements of humanity's first civilization. The British Museum in London, the Louvre in Paris, the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia, and the Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago all contain treasures that demonstrate the artistic, technological, and intellectual accomplishments of the Sumerians. The British Museum's Mesopotamian collection includes some of the most famous Sumerian artifacts ever discovered, including the Standard of Ur, the ram in a thicket sculptures from the Royal Cemetery, and thousands of cuneiform tablets spanning the entire history of Mesopotamian civilization. The museum's Assyrian galleries provide context for understanding how later civilizations built upon Sumerian foundations. The Louvre's collection, largely assembled through the 19th century French excavations at sites like Girsu, includes the remarkable statues of Gudea and the stelae of the vultures. These artifacts demonstrate the high level of artistic achievement reached by Sumerian sculptors and the sophisticated political and religious concepts that governed their society. The University of Pennsylvania Museum houses the largest collection of Sumerian artifacts in the United States, including treasures from the Royal Cemetery at Ur and thousands of tablets from the Nippur excavations. The museum's innovative displays help visitors understand how these ancient objects were used in daily life and religious ceremonies. The Oriental Institute at the University of Chicago has played a crucial role in Sumerian research through its excavations, publications, and educational programs. The Institute's Chicago Assyrian Dictionary project has provided essential tools for reading cuneiform texts, while its archaeological expeditions have uncovered important new evidence for Sumerian civilization. The ongoing excavations at Sumerian sites conducted by international teams of archaeologists continue to yield new discoveries that expand our understanding of humanity's first civilization. Recent work at sites like Uruk and Girsu has revealed new areas of ancient cities, uncovered additional cuneiform archives, and provided evidence for previously unknown aspects of Sumerian life. The challenges facing Sumerian archaeology in the modern era include political instability in Iraq, which has limited access to many important sites, and the unfortunate looting that has occurred during periods of conflict. The international archaeological community has worked to document and preserve Sumerian heritage while supporting Iraqi efforts to protect their cultural patrimony. The digital preservation of Sumerian texts and artifacts has become increasingly important as a way to ensure that this heritage remains accessible to future generations. Projects like the Cuneiform Digital Library Initiative are creating comprehensive online archives of cuneiform texts, while three-dimensional modeling is preserving detailed records of artifacts and archaeological sites. The interdisciplinary nature of modern Sumerian studies brings together archaeologists, linguists, historians, art historians, and specialists in many other fields. This collaborative approach has greatly enriched our understanding of Sumerian civilization by examining it from multiple perspectives and using diverse analytical techniques. The impact of Sumerian archaeological discoveries extends far beyond academic scholarship to influence popular understanding of human history and cultural development. Museum exhibitions, documentary films, and educational programs have brought the achievements of Sumerian civilization to audiences around the world, inspiring appreciation for humanity's earliest urban culture. The ethical dimensions of archaeological work in Mesopotamia have become increasingly important as scholars recognize the responsibility to preserve cultural heritage for the benefit of all humanity. International cooperation, respect for local communities, and commitment to conservation have become essential aspects of responsible archaeological practice. The future of Sumerian archaeology holds great promise as new technologies and methodologies continue to expand the possibilities for discovery and understanding. Ground-penetrating radar can locate buried structures without excavation, while satellite imagery can identify previously unknown sites. Advanced analytical techniques can extract information from even small fragments of artifacts or organic remains. As you settle into peaceful rest, imagine the quiet satisfaction of an archaeologist working by lamplight in a field laboratory in Iraq, carefully cleaning a newly discovered cuneiform tablet that may contain the thoughts and words of someone who lived 5,000 years ago. The gentle brush strokes that remove millennia of accumulated dirt gradually reveal the wedge-shaped marks that will add new chapters to our understanding of humanity's first civilization. This patient work of rediscovery, carried out by generations of dedicated scholars, has restored to humanity a heritage that seemed lost forever. The cities of Sumer live again in museum galleries and scholarly publications, their achievements recognized and celebrated, their innovations understood as the foundations of human civilization. Through the dedication of archaeologists and the preservation efforts of museums and institutions around the world, the voices of the Sumerians speak across the centuries, sharing their wisdom and inspiring continued appreciation for the remarkable achievements of our earliest urban ancestors. The rediscovery of Sumerian civilization stands as one of archaeology's greatest triumphs, demonstrating the power of scientific investigation to recover the past and restore to humanity knowledge of its own origins and achievements. From the buried cities of ancient Mesopotamia has emerged a complete picture of humanity's first great experiment in urban living, an experiment whose success laid the foundation for all subsequent human cultural development. From these archaeological discoveries comes our final understanding of Sumer's lasting impact, the recognition that this ancient civilization truly was the beginning of human history as we know it, the foundation stone upon which all later achievements would be built. As the gentle light of dawn breaks over the ancient ruins of Ur, casting long shadows across the weathered stones of humanity's first great ziggurat, we reach the end of our journey through time to the very beginnings of civilization itself. The soft whisper of wind across the Mesopotamian desert carries with it the echoes of voices that spoke the world's first written words, planned the world's first cities, established the world's first laws, and dreamed the dreams that would shape the destiny of our entire species. We have walked together through the streets of ancient Uruk, where 50,000 people learned to live as one community under the protection of massive walls and the guidance of wise rulers. We have witnessed the moment when human thoughts first became immortal, pressed into clay tablets by the careful hands of scribes who could not have imagined that their words would still be read 5,000 years later. We have stood in the great temples where priests and priestesses maintained the sacred bonds between earth and heaven, ensuring the favor of gods who watched over the world's first urban communities. In the quiet marketplaces of Sumer, we have seen merchants from distant lands bringing precious goods and new ideas that enriched the lives of all who participated in humanity's first great experiment in international trade. We have observed the development of the world's first legal systems, where justice was administered not through violence or favoritism, but according to written laws that protected the rights of all citizens. We have listened to the voices of poets and storytellers who created literature that still speaks to the human heart across the vast distances of time and culture. The legacy of Sumerian civilization flows through every aspect of our modern world, like the waters of the ancient Euphrates and Tigris rivers that gave birth to their remarkable society. Every time you live in a city, you experience the gift of Sumerian urban planning. Every time you read or write, you participate in the tradition begun by Sumerian scribes. Every time you follow a law or seek justice in a court, you benefit from principles first established in ancient Mesopotamian cities. Every time you attend school or university, you take part in educational traditions that trace their origins back to the tablet houses of Sumer. The numbers we use for mathematics and timekeeping, based on systems of 60 that give us 60 seconds in a minute and 60 minutes in an hour, preserve the mathematical insights of Sumerian scholars. The concept of government by law rather than arbitrary power, the idea that cities should be planned and organized for the benefit of their residents, the notion that literature and art can preserve human values across generations, all of these fundamental aspects of civilized life were first developed in the cities of ancient Sumer. But perhaps the most profound gift that the Sumerians gave to humanity was the demonstration that people can work together to create something greater than themselves. Before Sumer, humans lived in small groups where survival was the primary concern, and individual lives were bounded by immediate needs and limited horizons. The Sumerians proved that cooperation, organization, and shared vision could create communities where tens of thousands of people could live together in peace and prosperity, where knowledge could accumulate across generations, and where human potential could be realized in ways that would have seemed impossible to earlier peoples. The archaeological evidence that has restored Sumerian civilization to our awareness represents one of the most remarkable achievements of modern scholarship. From the patient work of excavators who carefully brushed away millennia of accumulated dust to reveal the treasures of the royal cemetery at Ur, to the brilliant scholars who deciphered the wedge-shaped marks of cuneiform writing, to the museum curators who preserve and display Sumerian artifacts for the inspiration of future generations, the rediscovery of Sumer demonstrates the power of human curiosity and dedication to recover the past and understand our origins. The tablets and artifacts housed in museums around the world, from the British Museum in London to the University of Pennsylvania Museum in Philadelphia, from the Louvre in Paris to the Oriental Institute in Chicago, serve as bridges across time that connect us directly to the thoughts, hopes, dreams, and achievements of people who lived at the very dawn of recorded history. When you stand before the standard of Ur with its vivid scenes of ancient warfare and celebration, or gaze upon the golden headdress worn by Queen Puabi over 4,000 years ago, you are experiencing a direct connection to humanity's earliest urban ancestors. The story of Sumer is ultimately the story of human potential realized through cooperation, creativity, and determination. The people who built the first cities, invented the first writing system, established the first laws, and created the first literature were not fundamentally different from us. They faced many of the same challenges we face today: how to organize large communities fairly and efficiently, how to balance individual desires with collective needs, how to preserve knowledge and wisdom for future generations, how to create meaning and beauty in daily life. Their solutions to these universal human challenges, developed through centuries of gradual innovation and refinement, created the foundation upon which all subsequent human civilization has been built. Every advance in human knowledge, every improvement in social organization, every achievement in art and literature, every development in technology and science has built upon the groundwork laid by these remarkable people who lived in the land between the rivers so long ago. The influence of Sumerian civilization extended far beyond the boundaries of Mesopotamia. carried by trade routes, diplomatic contacts, and cultural exchange to influence the development of societies throughout the ancient world. The civilizations of Egypt, the Indus Valley, ancient China, and the Americas all show evidence of contact with or influence from Mesopotamian innovations. The spread of writing systems, urban planning concepts, legal principles, and governmental structures can be traced from their Sumerian origins through the entire subsequent development of human civilization. As we contemplate the achievements of ancient Sumer, we are reminded that civilization is not something that happens automatically or inevitably. It requires conscious effort, sustained cooperation, and commitment to values that transcend immediate self-interest. The Sumerians chose to build cities rather than live in scattered villages, to develop writing rather than rely solely on memory, to establish laws rather than depend on force, to create literature rather than preserve only practical knowledge. These choices, made by countless individuals across many generations, created the possibility of the complex, interconnected world we inhabit today. The lessons that Sumer teaches us remain relevant in our own time, as we face the challenges of organizing increasingly complex global societies, preserving knowledge and culture for future generations, and creating meaning and beauty in an age of rapid technological change. The Sumerian example demonstrates that humans are capable of remarkable achievements when they work together toward common goals, guided by wisdom, justice, and respect for both divine authority and human dignity. In our modern world of instant communication and global connectivity, it is easy to forget how revolutionary the Sumerian innovations truly were. The idea that thoughts could be preserved in permanent form, that laws could govern the behavior of thousands of people, that cities could house vast populations in safety and prosperity, that trade could connect distant peoples in mutually beneficial relationships. All of these concepts that we take for granted today were once radical innovations that transformed the human condition. The archaeological sites of ancient Mesopotamia, though often threatened by political instability and the ravages of time, continue to yield new discoveries that expand our understanding of humanity's first civilization. Each new tablet translated, each new artifact uncovered, each new insight gained adds to our appreciation of what the Sumerians accomplished and deepens our understanding of our own origins and potential. The digital preservation projects that are now creating comprehensive online archives of Sumerian texts and artifacts ensure that this heritage will remain accessible to future generations, while new technologies continue to reveal previously hidden aspects of ancient Sumerian life. Ground-penetrating radar locates buried structures without excavation, chemical analysis reveals ancient trade connections and manufacturing techniques, and computer modeling reconstructs ancient environments and social systems. As you drift into peaceful rest, carried gently towards sleep by the rhythm of this ancient story, let your imagination return once more to those first cities rising from the Mesopotamian plain. Picture the morning sun illuminating the great ziggurat of Ur, its massive walls climbing step by step toward heaven like a bridge between the human and divine realms. Listen to the gentle sounds of a civilization awakening, the lowing of cattle being led to pasture, the voices of children playing in shaded courtyards, the calls of merchants announcing their wares in bustling marketplaces, the soft scraping of reed styluses pressing cuneiform marks into clay tablets that will preserve human thoughts for thousands of years. Feel the satisfaction of farmers surveying fields made fertile by ingenious irrigation systems, the pride of craftsmen creating objects of unprecedented beauty and sophistication, the wisdom of judges applying written laws to ensure justice for all citizens, the wonder of students learning to read and write in humanity's first schools. Experience the awe of worshippers entering great temples where the gods dwelt among mortals, the excitement of traders returning from distant lands with exotic goods and amazing stories, the joy of families celebrating festivals that connected them to the rhythms of nature and the favor of heaven. In these peaceful images of daily life in humanity's first civilization, we find not just historical curiosity, but inspiration for our own lives and communities. The Sumerians remind us that civilization is not about buildings or technologies, but about people choosing to live together in ways that honor both individual worth and collective welfare. They show us that human creativity, guided by wisdom and sustained by cooperation, can overcome any challenge and create possibilities that previous generations could never have imagined. The story of Sumer is the story of humanity itself, the moment when our species first glimpsed its true potential and began the long journey toward the complex, interconnected world we inhabit today. In their achievements, we see reflections of our own aspirations. In their struggles, we recognize our own challenges. In their successes, we find hope for our own future. As the stars that once guided Sumerian astronomers continue their eternal dance across the night sky, and as the rivers that nurtured the world's first cities continue their ancient flow toward the sea, the legacy of Sumerian civilization lives on in every aspect of human culture. From the deepest foundations of our cities to the highest aspirations of our arts and sciences, the gifts of Sumer continue to enrich and inspire human life. Rest peacefully in the knowledge that you are part of a story that began over 5,000 years ago in the cities of ancient Mesopotamia, a story of human achievement and potential that continues to unfold with each passing day. The same spirit of innovation, cooperation, and hope that built the first cities and created the first literature lives on in every human heart, ready to build new civilizations and achieve new wonders that the Sumerians themselves could never have imagined. Sleep well, carried by the gentle currents of this timeless river of human achievement, knowing that the dawn will bring new opportunities to contribute your own chapter to the endless story of human civilization that began so long ago in the land between the rivers.